call the Belville Planning Board special meeting to order for November 30th. At this time, we will stand and pledge allegiance to the flag.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Need a motion to approve the agenda as presented.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Item number 4, approval of the minutes from our November 9th, 2021 regular meeting. Those are in our packet. There's any changes or deletions to the minutes. Board would offer those up. If not, I entertain a motion to approve as presented.
Motion to approve.
A motion and a second. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Next item of business is quasi-judicial hearing, and it's for the purpose of reviewing and reporting on a special use permit application filed by Belville at Waterford Village, LLC, for a new residential construction along Pool Road, and it consists of 24.85 acres. And at this time, I recognize Mr. Blanchard, the town attorney.
Thank you. Hi, looking out, I can tell there are a number of people here tonight for the hearing, and I just want to go over some of the ground rules for the hearing. As the chair pointed out, this is a hearing on an application for a special use permit for Belville at Waterford. Now, a special use permit is what we call a quasi-judicial hearing. So what that means is evidence is going to be taken tonight, and if you want a place to follow along, if you've got your phones or whatever, it's section 9.4 of the town zoning ordinance. So when the applicant comes before us, there are a list of 9 conditions in the ordinance that the applicant has to offer evidence on. Or anybody who's opposed to this, who has standing, can stand up and offer evidence in opposition to the application. But there are some limitations on this, and I want to focus on these because a lot of times we find this streamlines the hearing process on all of these. As I mentioned a minute ago, this is a quasi-judicial hearing. So these board members are sitting as judges to hear evidence in a case. It's an important process because somebody's property, just like I assume all of you are property owners, somebody's property they've got a substantial amount of time, money, effort invested in is at stake here. So we have to recognize and guard their constitutional rights in this. So 2 of the big limitations on this, one of the big limitations by statute, and it's also included in our ordinance, there are limitations on the types of evidence that are offered here. North Carolina's General Assembly has decided that we're not allowed, these board members are not allowed to consider evidence on 2 things that frequently comes up in these cases. One of them is the impact on property values, and the second one is the impact on traffic, the impact of traffic on safety in the area, except by way of expert testimony. So, for example, to use that first one, the impact on property values, and the reason I'm going over these, the General Assembly, I guess, knew that those are the things that people come to complain about that are opposed to it. Somebody who was a appraiser, for example, might qualify as an expert. And I'm going to read to you from Professor Owens at the School of Government's paper on it. He gave you an example, to give an example. For example, for the board to find that neighboring property values would be significantly reduced by a proposed project, there must be testimony in the record to support that finding, such as testimony from an appraiser about the impacts of a similar project elsewhere in town, or a presentation of facts that would allow a reasonable person to conclude that property values would go down. So those are the types of testimony that you're going to need, for example, for property value testimony. Traffic, on the other hand, that's pretty limited. You're going to need, traffic study. We had earlier today a technical review committee meeting, and the applicant there, for example, gave a report from a traffic engineer. The DOT's staff do those all the time. Those are the types of testimony that you're looking for on those things. Secondly, I want to talk about standing, because this narrows down the group of people who are eligible to oppose. To have standing now, the general statutes, it's 160D-1402. It's limited essentially to people who own property that directly abuts the applicant's property, or other people that can show something called special damages. So, for example, if you're directly abutting it, that's one group of people, but another class of people that might have standing, and I'll use that example that we all hate, car washes. We'd all agree there are too many car washes in town. Well, you don't have standing to complain about car washes, an applicant asking for a new car wash, unless you've got standing. And standing would either mean that your property's right next door to where the car wash is going in, or conceivably, if you had a car wash a block down the road, even though you're not right next door, you might have standing. But somebody who just feels like, well, generically, I'm tired of seeing car washes in town, no standing. Okay? That's an important concept for you here. One, it keeps us from being here until next week on one of these hearings. But two, it also limits the hearing. Again, remember, this is not just a forum for people to come. It's not a forum for people to come talk about how they feel. It's a forum to decide somebody's rights with their property. This is like a court hearing. It's a hearing. Okay? Just like you don't allow anybody off the street in to complain at a criminal trial, you don't allow it in one of these, or a civil trial. It's limited to people who have a concrete stake in the project, or to witnesses who are being called to offer testimony in support of someone who has a concrete stake in the project. Okay? So I'm hoping that helps us narrow down the group of people. The other thing is that these chairmen, these folks are all volunteers here. And again, like I said, they don't want to be here till next week listening to this thing. And it's not fair for them to, it's not fair for the applicant, and it would make it harder to review the application later if anybody appeals. So we try to limit testimony if it's going to be duplicative, for example. To go back to that, even the traffic probably isn't the greatest example, but if I had a traffic engineer offering testimony and the other side, they don't need 6 traffic engineers. 1, maybe 2 is plenty, okay? We don't want to offer duplicative testimony. So with that in mind, Mr. Milligan, the chairman here, is going to swear in anybody who wants to come and testify later. Because standing up here to talk tonight in this hearing, it is sworn testimony. Just like if you're in court. You're under oath, you can be prosecuted for perjury. So it's an important thing here. This is somebody's rights are at stake here. Both the rights of the adjoining people with standing, the adjoining property owners, and the applicant. So with that in mind, let's try to keep some decorum here and focus on the issues at hand. The board is going to determine later whether they do or don't meet those conditions. I will tell you that, for example, if they vote to approve this application is a conditional use. in this part of town. And that's important. That means they don't get to just do what they want as a matter of right. The board can impose conditions. Now, those conditions have to be limited to one of the 9 things that are listed in our ordinance. For example, one of them asks if there are adequate utilities, access roads, drainage, and parking. A type of condition that would come up, may or may not come up in this situation, but that would naturally come up in a situation like this, would be a condition related to access roads, drainage, or parking. Another type of condition would be, for example, a condition that you have buffering, so that lights or sounds from a project like this not interfere with the neighbors. Those are the types of conditions that come up in one of these situations. So this is not just about approval or disapproval. They're also trying to determine what conditions would be appropriate if they do grant approval. Right? So I realize I've given you guys a lot more information than you'd ever want about a conditional use here. Yes, sir.
Of these 9 conditions, has the developer met all these conditions?
I don't know. I hadn't heard any evidence at all yet. Hadn't heard any evidence at all. Now, I will tell you, typically
So
a lot of...
he's going to speak tonight on these conditions?
Right. Now, a lot of them oftentimes are met through the staff report. For example, let me give you one of them.
Have we seen the staff report?
I haven't sat down and read it myself.
Oh,
Yes,
you
there is a
have.
staff,
You have.
oh, yeah. And there's an application, and those are a lot of times covered in it. But I'll give you one of them, for example. Number 4, the location and character of the special use would be harmonious with the area it will be located and in general conformity with the comprehensive plan. Well, it's a conditional use for this area. So ordinarily, that's going to be, absent some special, circumstances, that condition's going to be met for most of the special uses. And by the way, this is business residential, the zoning for this particular area. I understand it's business residential. There's only one of right use for business residential, and that's a group home. And that's they're not asking for a group home. So,
Does harmonious with the area include Leland or just Belville?
it includes the zoned area that we're talking about.
So that's just Belville. You don't care whether it's harmonious with Leland?
Well, there are other conditions that deal with that. There are other conditions that deal with that. But what we're talking about our plan, the Belville plan for that. But there are 9 conditions, and some of the other ones deal with adjoining property owners. Some of whom obviously live across the fence in Leland, not Belville. So yeah, I mean, this laundry list will cover a lot of those issues, and a lot of overlap occurs on the evidence. You could have evidence that covers 3 or 4 of these different conditions at one time.
Is there any way you could list the 9 conditions right now?
Yeah, sure. And I apologize, it's going to take a minute, and I'm going to paraphrase a little bit, but the first one is that the special use will not materially endanger the public health or safety. The second one, the special use meets required conditions and specifications. And that's asking for things like, do you have enough parking there under your code? Do you have enough of a vegetative buffer? Do you have, are you complying with the height guidelines? Things like that. Number 3, the special use will not substantially injure the value of adjoining, abutting, or adjacent properties, unless it's found to constitute public necessity. Now, there are circumstances, for example, a hospital, if you needed a fire department substation, that's a public necessity. It really doesn't matter, if it's going to have an impact on the adjoining property values. But
When you say adjoining properties, are you talking about adjoining properties in Leland?
adjoining properties.
Period. Right, could be included.
The 5th one, the special use will not be injurious to the permitted uses and enjoyment of other properties in the vicinity. The 6th one, the establishment of the special use will not impede normal, orderly, and permitted development and improvement of properties in the vicinity. Now, for example, I told you just a minute ago, remember, this is a conditional use for business residential, everything's a conditional use except for group homes. That one, number 6, you're not going to need much, if any, evidence on that because, well, the fact that it's considered a conditional use here goes a long way towards showing that. 7, the exterior architectural appeal and functional plan of the use will not be significantly inconsistent with the architectural appeal and functional plan of structures already being constructed or being constructed in the vicinity, or the general character of the subject district. Again, some of these things, a lot of times what you find is that the conditions in our statute aren't a close fit or really aren't a big issue for the property that we're talking about. Number 8, adequate utilities, access roads, drainage, and parking where necessary facilities have been or will be provided. Number 9, adequate measures that have been or will be taken to provide ingress and egress. So those are the types of
You
conditions.
say will be done.
Have been or will be. What goes back to conditions. Remember that it's not just an approval because this is a conditional use. The board is allowed to impose conditions to ensure, or they're allowed to propose conditions that make sure that they check the boxes for things like that. So that's where we are. The board's job is to determine whether they can check the boxes with the conditions that are either being proposed or that the board asks for. So that's where you are on it. Now, the other thing about this is not the last step. This goes before the town board as well. But that's where we are. And remember, I said if you want to testify, please let's stick to those topics. Unless you're a traffic engineer or somebody with that specialized expertise in discussing property values, please let's stay off of those things. I know people want to talk about those things, but the board's not allowed to consider it. It's not very fair to them or the applicant, or for that matter, the other folks in the crowd to have to listen to evidence that doesn't matter.
Just one last question. Is your Article 5, Belville's Article 5, Section 5.1.6, with regards to things like this should have amenities and walkways to increase pedestrian activities, decrease reliance on individual vehicles. Does that fall into some of these?
That will fall into, for example, number 2, required conditions and specifications. So yeah, those are the types of issues that you're talking about.
Okay.
Yes,
Can you
ma'am.
explain how this process works? So tonight is the first hearing, and after this, what's the process of what you all do and where it goes to? Can you just explain the process?
Assuming, I'm just saying that the flow chart from here, if it's approved or approved with conditions, it goes to the town board after this. Well, the town board decides whether to accept those conditions or not. So the planning board makes a suggestion on that.
Would there be a hearing with the town board?
Town board will have a hearing.
Are we entitled to close meetings?
Yes, it's a public meeting. Public meeting.
Will we be notified when that meeting is over?
That part I don't know. I don't.
Well, it seems like a lot of things happen without us being notified.
Yeah, and obviously,
Amendments to the zoning was done without our knowledge.
well, the amendments to the zoning are publicly, announced in our agendas.
You always send out these things to the zoning owners, but we never got anything on any type of amendment meeting. You can't throw something in a newspaper and expect everybody to have newspapers.
I don't, right off the top of my head, I don't know what happened on that.
And I talked to town manager Leland, he said, we never got notified about anything.
Well, Mr. Hollis doesn't have standing. I don't think he lives on that street.
But didn't your last meeting talk about how you wanted to be good with your neighbors in the neighborhood? To me, that's
I'm here to try to stick to an issue here. Let's get, I understand, you got a great thing to raise with Mr. Hollis if you want to, or in the public comment section of the next town board meeting. not really appropriate for a, condition
It just
use.
seems strange to me that you're telling us that we can't talk about value and we can't talk about traffic. These are the two main issues.
Not our choice, General Assembly. I know that's we're not allowed to consider those. It's simply against the law to do that. That's the quickest way to get one of these things turned
In
around.
other words, if somebody brought in an appraiser tonight, they could speak.
Assuming the appraiser had a basis for it, yes. But yeah, the General Assembly's prescribed. And look, let's face it, North Carolina is one of those states where, like many other states, property values, property rights matter to people. You wouldn't want your neighbors coming in to testify about what you could do on your own property without some kind of good basis for it. You have to have,
What about traffic?
same thing with traffic. I'm telling you, it's a statutory restriction. It's no use arguing with me about it. It's not my choice.
All I'm asking is that, you've asked us to do our homework. Has the town done their homework on traffic? And
I don't know yet. I'm here to hear some testimony. The board will hear testimony about it. But what I'm telling you is that those are the two big, and there's a third catch-all one, any other issue that would generally require expert testimony. Let me give you an example of that. If you were talking about somebody living right next door to a dam, you might need a hydrologist to testify about whether this development's going to cause a dam to fail. But those two by statute are ruled out. There's simply nothing that the board can do. They can't consider lay testimony on that, whether they want to, don't want to, or not. And us arguing about whether it's a good policy or not is not a good idea because we don't have any choice in it.
well, they're gonna make the decision. They're not legal. They're lay
Neil,
people.
has a question. So what is the process then, if we don't have expert testimony on traffic or property values at tonight's
You
hearing?
can testify about other things, just not those two.
But no, I'm saying, so if we don't have those tonight, will the board consider those at the next meeting, or is that,
I
is there
think
any process in between that?
the first step is to hear what comes out tonight, and then go from there. But generally speaking, this is going to be your primary place to get those. But at this point, we need to get started with the hearing. But yes, ma'am.
So the plan that was sent out, is that pretty much the plan that's going to be going into those acreage?
That's the application now. And remember, we talked about conditions.
Yes.
This is a place for conditions to be discussed. To meet these 9 criteria, and by the way, when I talk about conditions, we can't just come up with any old condition that we want. For example, we could,
Last call.
the town couldn't come up and say, hey, we need more affordable housing in this project, just because we like that as a concept. The conditions have to be related to meeting one of these 9 criteria. And look, they're pretty broad. So there's a lot of room in there for them, but they're not completely open-ended.
So if it will directly impact my property as far as light, sound, rodents, or whatever, then I...
Great thing to stand up and talk about
Okay,
wanting a condition for.
okay.
Like, remember I talked to you about traffic and property values? I didn't say anything about whether lights would be shining in your windows at night. Okay, so you want to talk about that? That's a good thing to talk about. And that would be related to a condition. You can say, hey, I'm not telling you to do that, I'm just telling you that that's one of those things that you're free to talk about.
Okay, when will I be able to do that?
After, first, the town staff will go, second, the applicant, and then third, anybody who's sworn in and who wants to offer testimony or wants to participate that has standing after that. Yeah, that's your opportunity.
Thank you.
Mr. Blanchard, make sure you reinforce standing.
And you preface that by saying, I directly about this, so that's why I'm talking to you about it.
I'm on lot 24.
And by the way,
Well, sorry.
to help us out, when we get started, if you stand up, after saying your name, you need to explain what your interest is. Hey, I'm right behind this, I'm next door,
Yeah.
that'll make things easier, because Mr. Milligan's job is to weed out the people who have standing versus those who don't. Yes, ma'am?
One question. After tonight, there will be another
It goes before the town board.
At that time, we can then bring in experts? Yes.
If you have standing.
So, and I'm focused on tonight. Please, let's go forward with this. All of us have families at home, so.
Well, we all do.
I
Get
know.
out of here, Stitches.
But yeah, that's, like I said, I know that's a lot more about these than you want to hear, but I don't want this to come as a shock to you when you get in. Somebody stands up and says, whoa, we're not supposed to talk about that. If you know what the rules are up front, it helps.
I still would like to have some dates as to when these public meetings are going to be held, so, we can attend.
I don't know when, if,
You have to tell me now, as long as.
oh, yeah, it is. Yeah. Hey, you're all here. Everybody know about it one way.
You got our addresses, you can send us a letter.
If he'd like to be placed on the sunshine list, if he'll leave his email, we'll.
Is it on the website?
Yes, there's as Ms. Williams pointed out, we've got a list,
Sunshine.
an email list, sunshine list you can get on and you'll automatically get notifications for these things. That's how the news media, by the way, knows to come here. All right, ready to start, folks? Okay.
Thank you, Mr.
Mr.
Mayor.
Milligan's going to want to swear some people in.
Well, before I get to that, I wanted to make sure that the record reflects Ms. Heath has joined the meeting. We started without her, so she is present.
Is your microphone working?
I don't know. And the first thing I have to do procedurally is we have to assure we have 3 members present, in which we do. This case is a hearing on the application for special use permit for Evolve at Waterford LLC for new residential construction. And at this time, I would ask the witnesses that include the town manager, the town clerk, our planning consultant, to come forward and be sworn in, Madam Clerk.
Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Jeff is on that. You go ahead. Okay. Jeff Capadona? Jeff, can you hear me?
I'm here.
Okay. All right. You have a Bible in front of you?
I choose not to use one. I'm raising my right hand.
Okay. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Okay.
For those in the audience, Jeff Capadona is our town planning consultant, so it's just sworn in. All right, this time I'll recognize Mr. Capadona and Ms. Williams, our town manager, to testify to the staff report.
Thank you. I'll just go over this report briefly and then turn it over to Mr. Capadona. The application for a special use permit was submitted. Yes, ma'am.
Is that thing even working?
On November 15th, 2021. The property owner is Seamist Properties Fayetteville LLC. The application was submitted by Evolve at Waterford LLC, represented by Mike Winstead. The property consists of 24.85 acres of vacant land along Pool Road, parcel identification number 047-00036-3608 and 3609. The frontage area is 2.784 along the north side of Pool Road. The property is zoned business residential. The applicant is requesting a special use permit to allow new residential construction to be located on the subject property, where the construction of an apartment complex with amenities would be present. The proposal indicates 20 buildings with approximately 502 1,000 gross square feet and 408 units, which would include also amenities such as a pool, pickleball court, fitness building, and garages. Density per square feet is 19.42. To the north of the subject property is development in Leland, the Waterford Residential Community zoned LER6. To the south, business highway and industrial zone properties in Belville that are commercial and industrial uses, such as the Cape Side Animal Hospital. To the east, properties that are zoned C2, commercial uses in Leland, such as medical offices. To the west, industrial properties in Belville, vacant land. The site depicts, as we said previously, construction of an apartment complex. The total area of the type 1 apartments is 296 square feet. Type 2 apartments, 196 square feet. The pool, 1,400 square feet. Clubhouse, 6,700, and fitness building, 2,700. All necessary driveway permits will be obtained by NCDOT, or from NCDOT. There are 2 proposed entrances along Pool Road, and there appears to be adequate circulation to mitigate any access concerns. There are also bicycle parking requirements that have been met. The site does not contain any known wetlands, and any permits from the U.S. Corps of Engineers will be obtained. Mr. Blanchard has already reviewed the findings of fact for special use permits, so I won't go over those. And in the opinion of the staff, we find that this application is in compliance with the Belville Vision 2030 plan, the land use plan as a part of the Brunswick County land use plan, and also we recommend that the planning board approve, or recommend that the commissioners approve this application with any conditions that they deem necessary. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Williams. Are there any questions from board members and staff about the application? Hearing none, at this time I will call on the applicant, Mr. Winstead, if you will come forward, sir, and be sworn in. Or is there anyone else that's from your?
Yes.
Sure, if you're going to address the board.
Should I have them sign it?
No, it needs to be logged in on the sheet. Oh, you need to, can you have them right now? You can put me, Brenda, Sarah.
Everybody raise your right hand. You swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
We got Mr. Avery, Pete Avery.
I'll just go, I'll
You
get
have
it to
Matt
the board.
Rogers.
I'm just gonna get it to
All right, who is going to be the lead for the applicant to address the board?
Hi, good evening.
Come to the mic and for the record, introduce yourself.
My name is Jerry Mannon. I'm an attorney in Wilmington,
Okay.
and I'm here on behalf of the applicant.
Okay.
And principally tonight, you're going to be hearing from Brad Schuler at Paramount Engineering. And as the hearing develops, you just saw pretty much all of our development team that's here. So as necessary and not being duplicitous, that we will call additional witnesses to testify.
So is everyone in your group going to testify tonight?
I don't think that they are.
Okay. Well, and I was gonna say, for the record, we need to know who those individuals were that's sworn in. They're not gonna address the board. Is that what
Yeah,
they're doing now? Okay. All right, proceed.
And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Schuler.
Mr. Schuler, if you would, please state your name and your purpose here tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Brad Schuler. I'm a land planner with Paramount Engineering. Our offices are in Bloomington. I don't have too much to add outside of the staff report. If you could switch it to the next slide, please. So shown here is an area of the subject site. In the surrounding area, highlighted in red is the site. So as you can see, it's located on Pool Road, which is the road that connects into Old Watersburg Way, adjacent to the Harris Teeter Shopping Center. As mentioned, the site is zoned for business residential. Next slide, please. Here's the zoning map here. So it is zoned for business residential, which is a district that permits a mixture of commercial and residential uses. Multifamily is permitted in this district with the issuance of a special use permit. The site abuts industrial zoning to the south. There is also business zoning to the east within Leland, and residential zoning to the north also within Leland. We believe multifamily development on this site would provide for an appropriate transition between the industrial development and the adjoining residential development. So shown here is the western portion of the site. Overall, the development consists of 408 dwelling units, which is far less than the maximum that's permitted under this zoning district. Under the current zoning, 745 units would be permitted. Again, we're only proposing 408. The site does include a little less than 8 acres, 7.8 acres approximately of open space. This includes amenities such as a clubhouse, a pool, and a fitness center. Next slide. Shown here is the eastern portion of the site. As part of this request, we are requesting a reduction in the amount of required parking. Evolve Companies has constructed many multifamily projects all across the state of North Carolina, and they have found that the requested parking would adequately serve the residents of the community. And by reducing the amount of parking, we're actually reducing the amount of impervious space and allowing additional green space to be provided on the site. So overall, we believe this proposal is appropriate for the site. Next slide, please. And it will provide a transition, again, between the abutting industrial and residential growth. The site's also located next to commercial services. It's in walking distance to, again, the Harris Teeter Shopping Center and the surrounding restaurants in the area. There will be walkways provided within the development. Next slide, please. As mentioned, there's criteria the board must consider, and we do agree with staff's recommendation that the criteria has been met with this proposal. It will not endanger the public health or safety. We will get all the necessary development-related permits required. It meets the required conditions and specifications of the ordinance. Again, this is a use that is permitted in the zoning district with the issuance of a special use permit. We have a real estate professional that can speak on the value impact of the proposal. Again, the location and character of the special use is harmonious with the area. Again, this is a use that's already considered appropriate under the underlying zoning district. It will not be injurious to any permitted uses for the enjoyment of any property in the vicinity. Will not impede the normal or orderly permitted development in the surrounding community. Again, as the attorney mentioned, this is a use that is permitted under the underlying zoning district. The architectural appeal will be the same or similar. to the surrounding area, if not better. Again, this is located next to industrial development. There are some metal facade structures within that industrial development. This is going to be very similar to other new multifamily developments that have been constructed in the area, including the Waterside Hawthorne project just down the road a little bit. And again, we have a traffic engineer present that can provide some information on the traffic impact of the proposal. And with that, I believe that concludes everything I wanted to go over with you all. In addition to the traffic engineer and the real estate professional, we also have a civil engineer, Tim Quingscale, with Paramount Engineering that can discuss the stormwater related impacts. With that, thank you for your time.
Thank you. Is there someone else from the applicant's team that wants to address the board? So come forward.
Mr. Chairman, for the record, we'd like to enter the staff report as Exhibit A, the presentation by the applicant as Exhibit B, the application itself as Exhibit C, and the site plan as Exhibit D. If there are any
Can you repeat that, please?
additional documents, then we would need to add them to this list.
Okay. What the clerk, town manager is requesting that the things that's been presented thus far in the meeting would be Exhibits A, B, and C for the record. It's just for procedural purposes, as evidence of this hearing. And that's the gist of it. If you want me to hear in detail, I'll have it repeat. Is that okay? Okay. Proceed.
Good evening.
State your name for the record, please.
I'm Elise Rocks. I'm a state certified general appraiser, and I have over 20 years of experience in the greater Wilmington area in commercial real estate. I was recently engaged by the applicant to perform research and analysis pertaining to the rezoning request. And as my expertise is in real estate valuation, I've limited my scope to that area. Initially, I performed a cursory review of several apartment communities in the greater Wilmington market to determine the impact, if any, of these properties had on adjacent property values. Some of the communities that reviewed included St. Andrews Apartments adjacent to Belville Village, Still Meadow Village adjacent to the lakes at Johnson Farm, and Hawthorne at the station adjacent to Lucia Point. During the research, no indication was found that the properties abutting the adjacent apartment communities had a negative or positive impact on value. Secondly, discussions with market participants is a common method to get a feel for how the market perceives various issues. So these discussions were held with appraisers and brokers, residential brokers, who indicated perceived no impact, positive, negative, for the proposed use. And then did a specific study, and I provided both this report, my research analysis, as well as this very specific detailed study of the of a community. This is Tesla Park, and it's adjacent to a subdivision called Georgetown. There are 20 properties in Georgetown, lots that are adjacent to the Tesla Park apartment community, and they were compared with 24 other properties that were not adjacent to Tesla Park. And so all of the data is provided showing that there was no difference in property values, and this was studied over a period from 2002, when the apartment complex was built, to the present time. So in summary,
When property values are up 30%.
and these are the data set continues through. It was just used, went back to the beginning of the apartment complex to have an extensive study. So there was no market data that was found that was suggesting that the proposed project would have any impact on the values of the adjoining or abutting properties. And again, as was mentioned, the infill is common with the highest and best use practices I see with the land use code and other projects. So,
I have a question for you.
yes, sir.
So, just so I'm clear, you're licensed by the state of North Carolina to be a commercial real estate appraiser.
Yes, sir.
And how long have you served in that capacity?
Began in 2006.
Primarily in
Commercial
Will.
only?
Now residential?
Commercial real estate.
I'm happy to define, in commercial real estate, it encompasses not only office and institutional, industrial, residential subdivisions, anything that's over 5 lots or more, apartment communities, anything that is considered commercial real estate.
So, in your professional opinion, this development will not have a positive nor negative impact on adjacent properties, correct?
No, as will be shown in the study, the lot sales were actually slightly higher for the properties that were abutting the apartment communities.
Wait a minute. Folks, we can't have outbursts during the proceedings. That's just not going to work.
It just came out.
Well, yeah. If you can't control yourself, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. So please. Thank you.
Yes, the data in the research showed that there was no difference. If anything, there was a positive because of a preference for not having other homes possibly in the backyards. But
Okay. That's your professional opinion.
that is my professional opinion,
Thank you.
based on my research and analysis.
Any
Any
other,
further questions?
any other questions?
Are you talking about Georgetown? Hold on.
Yes. I'm sorry. I couldn't hear for the outburst of the audience.
I was just
Question.
referencing, was it Georgetown and Wilmington on College Road?
That's correct. Thank you. Any other questions?
And he's got a full copy of my
All right.
analysis.
All right, thank you very much.
I was going to say, you may want to ask, Ms. Rogers, the only of right in business residential is a group home.
Right.
You may want to ask the question of how this would compare to a group home, since that's an alternative proposed use,
Well,
if you have any opinion at all.
I already know the answer to that question, but yes, I want to answer for the general public here.
I think that the impact from a surrounding use has shown to be more positive for apartments and bringing in more small business support of small businesses to support that use for projects such as this.
By right.
Yes.
Thank you, ma'am.
Can I just interject one thing? Is this lady talking about,
Sir?
You get a chance. Hold on to your questions. You'll get a chance at when they're done. It turns over to anybody who has the other side of this.
So was there a report of this exhibit?
Right, it'll be the next exhibit.
What number are we? E?
This is Exhibit E.
Welcome.
Hello, thank you for having us. My name is Caroline Sheets, and I am a professional traffic engineer in the state of North Carolina. I work at Randy Kemp & Associates, and I received my degree from NC State. The town is not requiring a traffic study for this particular project, but the project team had my firm prepare a traffic analysis to be able to speak on behalf of the traffic. Based on my analysis of the area, the only deficient intersection, and this is in, I know everyone is going to say every intersection is deficient out here, but based on the MCDOT standards, which is what we follow based on our guidelines, the only deficient intersection that's operating at a deficient level of service in this immediate area is during the afternoon peak hour at the Old Waterford Way approach with US 17. And this is obviously one of the main access points of the development. There are currently over 750 vehicles making this movement, which is causing that deficiency. The proposed site would not be expected to increase the traffic at this intersection at that time by more than 5%. And this is due to the fact that this is a residential development, and that would be exiting traffic during that PM peak hour, which if you imagine, residents, they are going to and from, commuting to and from work. So during that PM peak hour, they are they aren't exiting Old Waterford, they are entering it. So that's the reason why we would only be increasing that by 5%. And there are currently plans to upgrade this intersection unrelated to this project, which would be expected to mitigate this additional traffic that would be adding to this intersection. In my professional opinion, the site would have adequate access to the roadway network. I'm available to answer any questions that you may have.
Yeah, I do have a question for you. With your traffic study, because there are two entrances to the site property, you would be able to leave the property through the second entrance by way of Pool Road?
Yes, they could exit, and then they would be able to access US 17 via Gregory Road. So they would be able to bypass the intersection altogether.
So what is your percentage
In this
and usage
analysis,
in that way?
yep, 90% we put to Old Waterford, so it's a very conservative analysis, assuming that everyone is using that intersection.
So did you say, so the only deficient intersection, in your opinion, was Old Waterford over 17 Road?
Correct.
And DOT has plans to do upgrades to it? Even
Yes,
though this
there are-
development won't really affect it 5% or so. But
Yes.
there is DOT plans to update that intersection.
Correct, yes. I actually have a copy of the signal plan that has been updated, and it has been updated as recently. The seal on the signal plan is October 25th, 2021. So last month, they submitted plans to update this traffic signal.
So it's a signal update, not turn lane, just signal.
It is adding, there is currently pavement there, it is adding a third right turn lane from Old Waterford Way onto US 17.
Pool Road and DOT Road, or is it
No,
town road?
Private.
Private road.
That's all I have.
May we have a copy of that?
oh yes,
You want to enter that into the record?
sure. It's like-
Yes. Thank you.
Ma'am, can we get your last name again?
Cheats, CHEEB as in Victor, ES.
Caroline Cheeks.
Caroline Cheats.
Any questions for Ms. Cheese? Thank you very much.
Unless the board has any other questions that they would like to ask of the applicant, that'll be a show of that.
Okay, I do have a couple of questions about the site and its layout. It's in regards to the amenities area, the proposed pickleball courts and the clubhouse and the grill pavilion. That is, those structures are closer to the existing landowners. And I was just curious as to the hours of operation for those, for the proposed. Because if I'm Mr. John Upton or Robert Spalding and we got folks playing pickleball at midnight, that could be problematic.
We're gonna get that up there for you, Mr. Chairman. So the hours of operation would be sun up to sundown. That was
Sorry.
It's in the application. I didn't see it.
Will the pickleball courts have lighting?
Yeah. I'm not done, sir. Sir, I'm not done.
More questions?
So your final answer is sun up and sundown, is that
Yes,
correct?
yes, sir.
Okay. What about lighting for those areas? And the orientation of those, of that lighting?
There will be lighting on the site that will be designed by the utility providers. My understanding will be the full cutoff fixtures and will, as they're commonly designed, will limit any foot candle measurements at the property line with residential dwellings, but that will be designed by the utility company.
Okay. Well, I will just go ahead and share a concern of that lighting and it being a nuisance to our neighbors adjoining the property. So that needs to be taken into consideration.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And then the other question I had for you is, I see there's a 10-foot rear setback to the north of the property of the adjacent landowners in Waterford. I didn't see on the plan, is there any kind of fencing or berm or any type of barrier that would separate this project from the Waterford
On
landowners?
the western side of the site, there's a pretty substantial vegetated berm. It's about 8 to 10 feet in height. On the eastern side of the site, you see here, where you're going to do everything possible to preserve the existing vegetation out there. If there's additional concern, we'd be willing to agree to a condition that would require some additional plantings be installed.
So I am correct in my questioning, there is nothing proposed?
Not on this current plan, not outside of just preserving the existing vegetation as shown. There's no ordinance requirement for a buffer there, but we would be willing to do a hedge type of buffer that can grow up to 6 feet in height with some canopy trees.
The engineer.
So we'd be willing to work with you on a condition that would require some additional buffering.
Mr. Capadona?
Yes, I have, in my comments, I don't know when you want me to go through those, but I was going to address landscape buffers and screening.
Okay.
Recording.
Yeah. Floor is yours, sir.
Okay, is it a good time for me to go through all those comments then?
Yeah, because you've already been, we're discussing the applicant. So, and they said this would be, they were done presenting other than answering my questions, so you go ahead.
Okay, I will get to the buffers and screening as my last comment. Going through my plan sheet comments, I don't know if you all have, the planning board members have a copy of that.
Jeff, hold on just a second. Can you cut that projector off, because I think it'll help for the audience to be able to hear. So now I'm having a hard time hearing. Fans,
I think it's, the air.
Tell him to just go ahead.
Go ahead, Jack.
Speak louder.
So I know what you're looking at. Do you have a copy of the comments I made on the plan?
What date was it on top of your comment memo?
I didn't have a memo for this project. It was just a plan set with red comments on it. And no big deal if you don't have a copy of those. I can just
They
kind
have
of
that in their agenda packet, right?
It's in the agenda packet.
I'll give a minute for everybody to... So,
It's all.
running through those, a lot of them are pretty simple, so I'll go through those pretty quickly. My first comments are on sheet T2.0, the second page in the plan set. And I'll mention the ones of these comments that have been addressed in the updated plan set that is by the applicant as a result of these comments. First one was just a misspelling for the town of Belville. That's been fixed. I'm going to run down the left side of this particular plan sheet, going through those comments first. The second comment has to do with clarifying the skinny parcel that's in between these two bigger parcels for this project. If the planning board members recall from the rezoning, there's a small parcel that looks sort of like the continuation north on Backhill Road. And the best understanding of that parcel right now is that is within the town of Leland, town limits. And I just wanted to point that out to you. I make a similar comment on the following plan sheet, C2.1, that one of the 3 driveway entrances to this project off of Pool Road is coming off of that skinny parcel. Nothing that I really would say to be concerned about, but just to be aware of, that one of those entrances is likely to be, that parcel is understood to be within the town of Leland. So, just want to make you aware of that. Next comment was about addressing the maximum density for this project. As one of the applicant members said earlier, that they've corrected that. The maximum amount of units on this project is 745 units. And they proposed 408 units less, so they're meeting that maximum density requirement. The maximum building height is 40 feet. That in this zoning district, that's been corrected on the most recent plan set. On the new plan set, they also label the building information. They added a line that showed the proposed building height, and that is 40 feet. So they are right at the maximum limit, meeting that requirement. Next comment had to do with parking, and this is one that's worth some discussion. The required number of parking is based on 2 spaces per dwelling unit, and out of 408 units, that requires 816 spaces, and they're proposing 752 spaces. So the proposed parking is less than the required parking. So that particular item needs more discussion. I'm going to move on from that for now and go through my other comments, but it would be worthwhile for the planning board to come back to that particular item. Also, in the general notes section, I mentioned the note mentioned the traffic memorandum, and that I mentioned that would be expected to be received for this meeting, and I believe the traffic engineer that just spoke, I think it's right that the document she just submitted is that traffic memorandum. So I believe that requirement has been met. Moving to the top of that site plan page, part of the major development checklist in the town zoning ordinance requires showing the names of owners of adjoining properties. All of those have been updated on the updated plan set. And then I also mentioned per checklist item number 12, I need to show minimum building setback lines. That was an item that was addressed in the updated plan set. Flipping the page to C21, it's the same comment I mentioned earlier about the driveway on the skinny parcel. And then flipping several pages to the second to last of the plan set, I'm on L2.0. I had several comments on their tree removal and tree replacement information. And ultimately all the edits that I show in the markups in red for that table were copied to the updated table, and that essentially meets the requirements for tree replacement. On that note in particular, it's worth mentioning the tree removal for this project falls under section 10.53 of the zoning ordinance, which states protected trees are to be retained and protected to the maximum extent feasible. Permit shall be issued for the removal of protected trees unless one of the following conditions exists. And then it goes on to list certain conditions where that exists. This project falls into subsection 1053B. That addresses necessity to remove trees in order to construct proposed improvements as a result of, and this project includes need for access to the building site for construction equipment, also location of proposed structure, also location of proposed parking spaces and associated circulation required to be installed by the zoning ordinance. And all that being said, that's the protected trees that are proposed to be removed are allowed under those sections of the ordinance. It's all the protected trees proposed to be removed are in areas where there's a proposed building or proposed parking area, etc. So that is the reasoning behind why those protected trees are able to be removed. It could be argued that the developer could relocate buildings, etc., parking areas to avoid removing some of those protected trees. But ultimately, the buildings and parking areas that they're showing for proposed development, all the protected trees that fall within that area are allowed to be removed. So that's all the comments on the plans, and then I mentioned screening and buffering that I thought I would get to as the last comment. Section 10.2 of the zoning ordinance deals with buffers. Most commonly understood to be a landscape buffer, which when they're required, I believe need to be 20 feet wide. That section requires buffers specifically. The landscape buffers shall be required and provided along all property lines of a lot zoned multifamily, manufactured housing, business residential, etc., several other zoning districts. When such property lines abut property located in the R10 or R15 zoning district. So it specifically mentions Belville's R10 and R15 zoning districts, and doesn't necessarily include the Leland properties, since it specifically calls out the Belville R10 and R15 zoning districts. Related to that, the following section in the ordinance, 10.3, screening, has more to do with screening for dumpsters, outside storage areas, heating, air, conditioning units, etc. And that language says it requires screening from the view of property lines abutting a residential use district or right-of-way through the use of plantings and or fencing that provide 75% opacity within 2 years of planting. So with that particular language, they just, it uses specifically the phrase residential use, as opposed to where buffers specifically say R10 and R15. So it's my interpretation that the screening would be required to screen the areas that abut the residential uses in Leland. Whereas the buffers, since it specifically calls out the R10 and R15 zoning districts, the landscape buffer is not required by the zoning ordinance. I think that's all I have to say on that. And I'm happy to take any questions and go from there.
Can you hear me? Jeff, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Can you define buffer versus screenings? I understand the landscape buffer, I don't understand the screenings you said.
Yeah, the screening is more intended for dumpsters, outside storage areas, heating and air conditioning units, etc. It's about just providing vegetation to screen from those, what some might consider a non-aesthetic area. Whereas the buffer is more intended to provide a wider, typically a landscape buffer, between properties. But like I said, that is only required for R10 and R15 zoning districts.
Okay.
Okay.
Any other questions for Mr. Campadone from the board?
I had
All right. Mr. Board's got a couple of follow-up questions.
So this goes to what Mr. Captain was talking about with the parking. You know, parking requires, was it 808, 814, we got, you're providing 750 or so, so just justifying the less non-parking.
Hey, Mr. Boyd, so again, Belville companies, they build multifamily developments all over the state of North Carolina. They have found that the typical 2 parking space per unit, they don't need that much. I mean, that's, yeah, I'm a planner by trade. That's the 2 parking spaces per dwelling unit is a typical residential parking standard, and it's generally applied to your single family type of developments. With this being multifamily, you're going to have a mixture of housing types and housing units, so including 1-bedroom units in addition to your 2- and 3-bedroom units. You're also going to have a shared parking setup versus a non-share, like a driveway with a single-family development. And with a single-family development, your neighbor's not going to park in your driveway when you leave and go to work. In a multifamily shared parking space, those parking spaces are available. And so what they have found, what they have constructed all throughout the state of North Carolina, is that what they're proposing today is sufficient to provide enough parking for the residents and the development. And they don't want to provide less parking. They don't want people parking on, you know, the side of the street or anything like that. They want to provide adequate parking, and they feel like this is enough parking without overdoing it, without adding too much impervious, where you're just going to have empty parking spaces and less green space. And so that's why we're making the request to reduce the parking.
To take that a little bit further, if are the parking spaces numbered according to the apartments they're assigned to, or is it a landfill?
I do not believe they're assigned to defer. No, they're not assigned to any particular unit.
So you might have to park 3 little buildings away if they're parked, you're full in front of your building. Correct?
And yeah, if that's the case, I would say generally most people try to park closer to
Where they live.
where they live. So generally there will be spots in the general area of the subject's building.
I know, I ran into it, my son's in DC, they had actually numbered the parking spot to the town. And God forbid if you parked in the wrong spot. There's no charge here.
So if I rented a 1-bedroom apartment, I'd get 1 parking space?
Well, you would have just access to the whole parking lot.
You're not guaranteed a space.
Nobody uses the white zone.
But this is what they do. So.
Yeah,
What about a family with kids?
We're not taking public.
Yeah. So, just so I heard you clearly, our ordinance requires 2 parking spaces. And you said that, based on the 752 spaces, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
What you're proposing would be adequate in your opinion?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Jeff or Swing, is there any town issue of, you know, that is our minimum standard? Would that be a condition of approval? Or is that just something the town would just?
It could be, if you so choose.
Well, I mean, does it have to be? You know, because they're not meeting the minimum town ordinance requirements.
I'll defer to Mr. Blanchard on that.
I don't think you have to make it one, but you could. You certainly could if you felt like that. Now,
I don't think that's necessary. It's just, you know, to me, when there is a requirement, you meet it, or there's
there's
right.
got to be a reason not to meet it.
Right, which you give a very good reason.
yeah.
It's just, I didn't know if there was some procedure thing with the town that would be, you know, if I go to the water company and say, well, I'm only gonna, you know, put one toilet in.
Well, it's a conditional use, so you can, I mean, you've got a little bit of flexibility on that. I think you would have to have some countervailing interest for not requiring that. I think he's explained, for example, there are a couple of them, less impervious space and more green space.
I just don't want someone to come back and say, well,
too.
they didn't meet the requirement, so this has been thrown out or something like that.
One of the things Jeff talked about a little bit was the buffering requirement. Again, you have these conditions, these 9 conditions that we talked about. Remember, you can impose conditions to meet one of those. If you find, for example, that it would be beneficial for the neighboring homes to have some type of buffering, that'd be a perfectly legitimate type of
Well, I'm about to
condition.
get to that one.
Oh, no,
I just want to make sure that.
I wanted to mention that while it was in my mind.
Yeah, if they don't meet, the town says either minimum 800, they have 750. No one's going to come back later and say, well, they didn't meet it, town code says it, we throw it, everything you guys just decided. We're not kind of,
And they could have
not giving ideas.
Could have asked for some administrative relief on that anyway, from the manager through that process.
And to that point, in Article 11, the off-street parking, it indicates that special situations that are not covered by this section would be handled by the zoning code administrator, which is myself, to make the final determination as to the number of spaces required, and shall in all cases be given due consideration to the needs.
That makes me feel a lot better.
That's a copy of this.
My next, I guess I'll move to the buffering. Is there any sort of fencing that's proposed? I didn't see, there's no fencing along the
The existing homes, all, in my understanding, have a fence in the backyard. So there's already a fence line that runs down, besides where the berm is, on the eastern side.
Okay. That's just something, you know, a rear fence might be something nice to help buffer some. Another thing, which, you know, it's not required, but, you know, it looks like there's room for, you know, either a 20-foot planted landscape or undisturbed. It could be accommodated. I feel if this was next to basically R10, R15 is what they are, not in the town of Belville, but it would, to me, I think that'll go a long way with a 20-foot buffer, either existing non-disturbed buffer or plantings that can be disturbed to plant that. Will probably go a long way.
As I mentioned, we're willing to add some additional plantings along that northern boundary outside of where the berm is on the eastern side.
But not go as far as say, well, a 20-foot buffer or,
I would have to
understand.
check on
Okay.
that. We can-
More offense.
It's just something to me that I'll be just.
Something
A
tall.
better separation.
Well, it's like, I guess,
No,
Oh, so I asked a separate question.
You still have another question?
It'll be from Mr.
Be willing to agree to a 15-foot due to the grading that's required there. That will be on the eastern portion of the site outside of where the existing berm is.
So 15 feet across the whole northern side?
Out on the eastern side, there's a berm on the western side that's
You're going to leave that undisturbed?
undisturbed. There's going to be a portion where we might have to put up a wall in order to get the parking in where the berm is, but the height of the berm will remain. And then on the eastern side where there is no berm, we're willing to do a 15-foot buffer. We can add plantings, an evergreen type of hedge, kind of like with wax myrtles or something along those lines. overgrow to up to 6 feet in height within a 4-year period, and then one canopy or 300 short trees every 100 feet. I would take suggestions. I don't have any particular species in mind. There's another landscape.
For me to keep it simple, on western side, there's an existing berm. How tall is that berm?
8 to 10 feet.
And we'll okay, so where the berm stops, y'all are then willing to give a 15-foot landscape buffer.
Yes.
And if that extending that, that's a berm, this would be a planted 15-foot area along the rest of the northern property. That seems a good compromise to me. And then my other question dealt with stormwater. Just general question. I just want to ask us what the public said. We just
All right, Mr. Boyd has stormwater question.
I just wanted to.
Yes.
See, just
State your name for the record, please.
My name is Tim Quinkscales, registered surveyor in the state of North Carolina, work for Paramount Engineering.
This project is going to be designed to meet state and county requirements for stormwater treatment.
Or city, I guess, town.
Right, it's just the same.
Okay, yep,
These
yep.
Virgin County City.
Yes.
What we do. Just want to make sure I wanted to state it. So
Yes.
stormwater will be treated to the standards of the state and harvest of town/county.
Yes.
That's all.
Perfect.
Thanks, sir.
What was your name again, sir?
Tim Quinkscales,
Quinkscales.
CLINKSCALES.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Is there any other presentation from the applicant? Going
I
once.
could have just one moment. I don't know if Mr. Quinkscales was sworn.
Oh, was it?
He was.
Yes, sir.
Okay, I just want to make sure.
Oh, yeah, I want to let him speak if he had to.
It's good.
It's-
Nothing further.
Okay. So at this time, is there any other questions from the board members to the applicant's group that needs to be addressed? At this time, I'm going to close the applicant's case, and I'm going to call on anyone who is in opposition who has standing to please come forward and be sworn in. Jared? Well, you got to be sworn in if you're going to address the board.
Just who is good standing on
You need to say your statement.
I'm here, son, I'm a member of the Board for National Residential Association.
You would. If one of your members would have standing, you would under the statute. Yes.
Thank you.
If one of those property owners is somebody on that back strip, you would have
We have
standing.
common property to this,
That works too. That's actually specifically in the statute, homeowners association.
I'm not really actually on both ways.
My husband isn't here, but I have his name down with me because I'm going to give you his phone number and email.
If when you're signing in, I only need the person that's here. If the person is not here, they're not being sworn in. So that's not put anybody's name that's not here. Ma'am, you got to be sworn in. I know I have everybody. You want to go get it?
The way the statute reads now, it says special.
Please don't leave without being sworn in. Come up here and sign.
Is there a restroom right there? I'll do it after I get sworn in. I was jumping the gun. No, I signed in. I was ready to get sworn in. I'm excited. Are you going to have a speak in the word that you signed Save the best for last. You're a hammer tester.
Is that everybody? Excuse me. Is that everybody at this time? Please remember to take the picture. Everybody will try to place your hand somewhere in your Bible. Put your left hand on the Bible, raise your right hand. Please, excuse me. Okay. All right. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Okay.
Brenda, I think a couple of them might have sat down. Can you just ask? Can you ask if any of them?
What now?
I thought I saw a couple ladies that signed up go sit down before the swearing in. Yes, right here.
I saw that I had 7. All right, then. I thought I saw a couple of people that came up and sat down. Is that it? Excuse me. You must be sworn in before you can come up. Is that everybody?
We're going to take a 5-minute recess so the board members can have a break. Thank you.
So I thought the lady in the white shirt came up and signed it, and then she went back and sat down. Maybe she decided not to.
Maybe she decided not to.
I didn't know see how many he swore in.
I did see a couple people come up and then go back and sit down.
Okay. Maybe they thought somebody else was going to address them.
I got water, thank you.
Ms. Williams, do we have all the witnesses sworn in? Opposition, I guess I should say.
Yes, the deputy's making a copy of that list.
Roll call. Thank you, sir.
That gives you, they can see everything. It really is. I don't know how he did that, because he usually looks like they see all three, and he just has the ones.
People that are watching it.
Somebody was sending me emails. Show me what is the mayor I did. I didn't get the list of the notifications off. So Thank you. We'll add you guys all on there. We'll add you all to the
All right, we're going to bring this meeting back in order.
It's back to you, seconds.
Yes, thank you, sir. Flames out.
Bring it up.
At this time, we'll hear from the opposition parties. The individuals that have been sworn in and to address the board. We'll recognize Miss Nancy Freeberger. Freiberger. If you would, if you'll come to the podium, please, and state your name for the record and your address and what's your standing when addressing the board tonight.
Yes, Nancy Freiberger, like frying a hamburger, and I live adjacent to the property. My house backs up to the property where this is proposed. I also have been a licensed real estate agent for 44 years, with 15 of those years here in the state of North Carolina. I do take issue with the appraiser saying that there would be no benefit or detriment to having apartments behind us. In my experience of selling residential property, anytime I showed property and there were apartments behind it, I would say in all cases the buyers all were discouraged from buying a property that was like that unless there was an advantage financially to do so. They would prefer to buy something if it was the same price in a better location. And my property is one of the ones that Mr. Milligan mentioned. We would back up to the pickleball court. And so I am also very concerned about noise from that. And when the gentleman, you asked about the hours for that, and he said sunrise to sunset. Well, sunrise can be pretty early on the weekends. And I personally have 2 dogs, which is why I bought the property that has the fence in it. And I know as soon as they hear pickleball going on, you're going to have pickleball and barking going on to try and control. Also an issue with lighting. And the fact, as my understanding is, this is going to be 2 levels. So you have apartments. So I'm worried about people being able to look into our properties. That kind of concerns me. I think some of the garages will block some of that, but I'm not 100% sure. So I would really like to see more buffering done. And finally, I'm concerned about impervious surface and water. Especially when we go back to when Florence was here, we had a lot of water in Waterford. And reducing that amount of impervious surface concerns me in that respect. That's it.
Thank you, ma'am. Since Nancy spoke about the presentation of the appraiser earlier at this time, I will recognize you, ma'am, if you would like to comment in rebuttal. Be appropriate. You don't have to. I'm just.
No, you have my data. That'll be my only comment.
Okay. All right. Thank you. All right. Next individual signed up to address the board, Suzanne Root.
I'm switching with Suzanne because I've got to go and pick my wife up from.
I'm going to go after him, but I'm here.
I'm Eric. So
Okay.
she's switching with me real quick.
All right. And state your name for the record, please.
I'm Dr. Eric E. Tamaru. I am stating because I live at 1143 Spring Glen Court, which is lot 17 on the plans there, abutting the western side there on the berm. I am also a licensed realtor in the state of North Carolina. I work with Intracoastal Realty in the Leland branch. And I also am a former police officer, and so I've got some concerns in both these areas. I do, in my experience as a realtor, as Mrs. Freiberger already shared, showing homes, selling homes, continually appraising, or not appraising, but assessing property values. It's part of our job. And I can tell you that what's the #1 axiom in real estate? Location, location, location. And as she stated, when we bought our property, all of us along the properties that are affected, part of our location that we liked was the serene privacy, the trees, the berm, and so on. And in all due respect to the appraiser, we are not Wilmington. We are not in a city environment. Waterford is very, very unique. It's unique, I think, even in the state of North Carolina, the way it's set up, the way it's designed, canals. There's a draw to be in Waterford. Well, those property values there along this proposed area, those property values are going to decrease. And don't take it from me, the National Association of Realtors, they gave the top 10 reasons why property values are dragged down. The number one reason is bad schools. And that can affect your property by 22%. The second one I don't think we need to worry about, and that's a strip club. That could bring your property values down by 14%. But a high concentration of rental properties or renters can bring down an adjacent property 13.8%. That concerns me because we're now going to be receiving 1,000 plus new neighbors in my backyard. My backyard, by the way, according to those plans, is only about 100 feet from the nearest building. So literally in my backyard. Okay, so that's one aspect. Increased noise pollution can squeeze your property up to 10%. We know that apartments and pickleball and a swimming pool and other increased noises, people with their balconies and music playing and car doors slamming throughout the night, there's going to be an increase in noise pollution. And that can increase or decrease your property by 10%. In 1926, the SCOTUS, the Supreme Court of the United States, had a case called the Village of Euclid versus Ambler Realty, and a case regarding the legality of zoning, and especially specifically regarding apartment houses next to single-family housing. I'm just going to read one very small part. Very often the apartment house is a mere parasite constructed in order to take advantage of the open spaces and attractive surroundings created by the residential characteristic of the, I'm missing a page here, but here it is. And they conclude by saying, the residential character of the neighborhood and its desirability as a place of detached residences are utterly destroyed. That's the Supreme Court's opinion back in 1926. Now, I know we live in the 21st century now. So that's one concern I have as a realtor and a property owner there in Waterford. But I'm also, as a former police officer, I am very concerned about the decreased privacy and security of our neighborhood. Waterford is a gated community. Each little enclave has its own gated area. I'm concerned now that I have a berm, no fence. I'm glad it was brought up about the buffer zone and the need for a security fence along the entire border there, because now, again, 1,000 new neighbors in my backyard. And as a police officer, as a patrol officer, I knew that apartment complexes were typically a higher area of crime. And so again, adding 1,000 new residents, you're just naturally going to raise the level of crime in your area. So that's my concern, is that we have a fence, something to mitigate that extra foot traffic and so forth. And then lastly, I know we're not supposed to talk about it, but I am concerned about the noise pollution and the light pollution. I'm glad you guys have mentioned that. But from my house, my backyard, if they're 40-foot high buildings, there's going to be lights in my backyard. That's going to make an effect not just for us, and that's where I think a high fence could be, and vegetation could be a big plus. So thank you very much.
Thanks, sir.
Sir, can I please have a copy of that?
Oh, you can have this if you want.
Thank you.
Exhibit what?
Appreciate it. Jay?
What number, Ms. Williams?
Jay?
Jay. All right. Next individual signed up to speak, Ms. Suzanne Root.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for giving us the opportunity. My name is Suzanne Root. I live at 114 One Spring Glen Court.
My property buttresses directly up to this project on the berm side. I just have a brief comment to make, or statement to make, and then I do have a pretty well sized out graph here. I'm in lot 16 next to Mr. Tamara's property. The question before this planning board is if Evolve's plan and design meet the requirements and would promote the health, safety, morals, general welfare, order, comfort, conveniences, appearance, or prosperity of this community. The special use requirements are written so broadly, not to mention includes a conjunction that seems to allow the board to pick any one of the requirements noted. Therefore, Evolve's proposal may increase convenience, but not all the rest. However, please note that all encompassing clauses suggest any special use must be appropriate throughout the zoning district. Evolve Company states that their goal is to design progressive, modern communities, as was noted by my husband on June 8th, the June 8th meeting. The design of many of the recent properties like Racine Commons, the Bank of America building, and Sawmill Point do not fit their surroundings. Evolve boldly states that there will not be in their stated goals. If anyone needs evidence of what this construction will look like, visit other developments nearby. Hawthorne at Leland, Hawthorne at Smith Creek, or Hawthorne at Waterside. All of these are examples of what Evolve will build and what their design will look like. None of it will match the surrounding homes in their architecture and their traditional elegance. Also, they're talking about a setback of only 10 feet from our berm. Like Mr. Tamaru said, a 40-foot building, basically, 35 feet of it, which will be a 3-story apartment building, will not only easily look over our berm, as he said, we have issue with the noise, because if you look at the map, this is lot 16. If you look down, they have a parking garage and 10 feet from our berm, which is going to be a lot of noise and a lot of light. Also, we know that they have been looking at the berm because they all showed up, surveyors showed up on our side without notice, trespassing through our backyards to do so. For reasons that we have told you about, whether it is the lights, the noise, safety is a consideration as well. For these reasons, we ask for this board to delay the granting of this permit until they come into compliance with the requirements of special use. As the original plan demonstrates, there is no convenience for the community, no considerations of safety, certainly no compliance with appearance, potentially harms prosperity and order in the form of bringing with it all that which dwellings of this sort bring, as the crime stats suggest. The berm was recently surveyed, and this suggests that there will be modifications to it in some way, or at least digging in and around it. This reality of why also needs to be made clear for the health and safety of the residents buttressing it. Is it for water runoff management? If so, why is it not noted in the plan? When we first began this process, we were assured by the representative for McKinley Building Corporation, gentleman back here, that there would be communication and an agreeable working relationship between those of us that buttress this property in Waterford. After several calls went unreturned by this gentleman, we believe this public promise by this representative of McKinley was not kept through, but kept, though he made it in this forum in front of this council, which to us only screams of the blatant disregard for concerned taxpaying Waterford citizens, residents, who will be directly affected by what can be only described as an eyesore. Especially given the fact that it clearly states on their submitted plans that they intend to remove over 430 well-established, fully grown pine trees, as well as other trees, leaving Waterford residents with a view of a concrete jungle instead of the beautiful North Carolina pines and other native trees as their landscape, not to mention the bike walking paths that we have along that buttress. which was put in at the very beginning of Waterford's inception over 16 years ago. Needless to say, the residents of Waterford have lost total faith and trust in McKinley Building Corporation and their representative to be forthright and honest about their true intentions, since they have demonstrated that they cannot be trusted. Therefore, briefly stated, we, the residents of Waterford, do solemnly record our protest under these concerns have been until these concerns have been dutifully addressed. We also invite the members of this council, and including the McKinley Corp, to take a brief tour of our neighborhood to see for yourselves just how detrimental this will be to those directly affected before this council votes on this issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker to address the board is Doreen Pearl.
Hi, my name is Doreen Pearl. I'm at 1030 Golden Sands Way, and it's lot number 12. And if you could, I don't know if you could put it back up there, or you have a copy of it there. If you look at that,
Building 11 is closest to your property, if that's what you
yes.
want to refer to.
It, the fencing, which would be the fencing that we own, it doesn't look like there's enough buffer there that we would actually be staring. I mean, it would be right basically in our backyard. We have, you know, there's no street there. It would just be the whole side of a building. And if I could ask how far of a distance that is, do we know? From that building's corner to my fence, or what is that dark line? Is that their property?
Why do you ask that? Yeah, would someone from the applicant group?
You are actually allowed to question the applicant.
Oh, okay, so that's what I'm asking, I guess. On building 11, how far is that from, say, my fence line?
Here.
Mr. Schuler.
Mr. Schuler might be the best person.
Mr. Schuler, the question is,
This is,
Ms. Pearl lives adjacent to where the proposed building number 11
this is my home.
is on the plan, and she's wanting to know what is the
There's
distance.
absolutely no buffer. What is that distance?
That's probably approximately 20 feet.
Because it's a 10-foot setback that's required by the ordinance. So
The target's about 20 feet back, the other ones are about 100 feet.
So this building would be 20 feet. What is this line?
That's the property line.
Okay, and what is that line?
That's the fence line in your back.
Okay, so this, between this and this is mine, and that's yours. So from here to here is 20 feet approximately?
Approximately.
And you're planning on doing no buffer between that?
Well, we agree.
A 6-foot buffer?
Right, we'll have to, let's get to that. It'd be a 15-foot wide buffer, and then the plantings that we put in there, the rows.
So that's, I mean, my fence is like 8 foot, so a 6-foot tall hedge is not gonna help at all. How about the lighting from this building? Where will the lights be located?
Again, the lights they'll be worked out with the utility company, as I mentioned. And it's the general practice that the foot candles will be limited along the residential property line.
Okay, but what about the building? Like the height of the building?
Right.
You're gonna have lights up there, so that's gonna show right into my backyard.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly where the lights in the building are going to be.
Where are they typically? You've built these before.
Right, yeah, I would have to defer.
Okay, let's go ahead and defer.
it would be at least on the sidewalk
Yeah.
coming up to the building.
most of the lights are put full cut off. They're designed to shine in a downward direction.
Down into my yard?
Yeah, straight down into an area. And then the foot candles, they're designed again to minimize the spread of the light and shine into a certain area. We haven't got to that level yet. That will be with the building plans once we get the lighting plan.
But there's no guarantee that the lighting is not going to affect my bedroom, my backyard.
We can, if it's pieces of board, you know, we can make sure the foot candles are limited at the property line.
Okay, and then we also have the trash bin right along within less than 20 feet of the property line. So what is your proposal to not have the smell and the rodent population not just come right into lot 12 and lot 13?
We'll have to meet the screening requirements. Right.
How does that?
We're okay with relocating that.
We can relocate that to a different location.
What? We're gonna do what?
We can the dumpster, we can relocate.
Okay, so is there any kind of screening, higher screening that you can put here to help with us in this situation here? We have this buffer at least. We have no buffer here on lot 12 and lot 13, 0.
Again, we have agreed to a plan of a 15-foot buffer on the site there, and we can discuss the materials that will be required, and then the board wishes.
Okay, so.
Ms. Pearl, for the record, your concern is noted.
Okay,
And well, I just say that when the plan is finalized, it will meet all the town standards.
I understand that.
Based on our ordinance.
I understand that.
So your concern about proximity and rodents
Lighting,
and smell and so
rodents
forth
and
as part of the
crime
record
and-
and can be taken into
Okay,
consideration.
well, thank you for your time.
Yes. Anything else you'd like to share with the board? Okay, thank you very much. All right, our next speaker is Kurt Nielsen? Close.
Close. Hi, Kurt Nielsen. I live at 1046 Garden Club Way in Waterford. And my backyard and fence are directly next to the apartments. So I had a couple questions for the applicants. When you did the appraisal, how many cases did you do research between apartments and homes? You talked about that you had done comparisons between where apartments were built and homes were built. How many cases did you do that? Look at.
It's in the report.
Is he calling on her?
Yeah, I'm calling
Yes.
on her. He's allowed to question a witness from the other side. The report is Exhibit E.
But you don't, you were paid by them and you don't know how many?
I've mentioned 3 subdivisions, 3 cases, as well as a fourth very specific detailed lot analysis.
And where were they located?
They were located in the Greater Wilmington area.
Were they located in Leland or Belville?
One of the projects I studied was in the area.
Was in Leland or Belville? Well, you did it.
There's a third list.
Okay, but it doesn't say what town they're in. So my question is, how applicable is the research if it wasn't done in Leland or Belville? You talked about pickleball courts being sunset to sunrise, or sunrise, sunset. Are there lights on the pickleball court? Why would there be lights on the pickleball court if you can't use them after sunset?
We're making notes and everything you're asking.
But I was waiting for an answer.
It's landscape low lighting, as Matt was explaining.
Oh, so it's not like upper so you can play at night?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. And then how many homeowners abut the apartments on whether Golden Sands or Garden Club Way? And, yeah, how many homes do you know?
So,
25 or 26,
26?
roughly.
Okay.
I might have missed one.
So my concern, noise and light was a condition we could address?
Yes.
Okay. So you're talking about 480 units. If you average 2 people, that's over 800 people, and 800 cars where you have 25 homes. So the volume of light and noise is going to be immense and severely affecting our pleasure in owning and living in our own home. So I'm not here to oppose it. Growth is natural, and it should happen. But I think there was discussion about the north side, that our 6-foot fence was sufficient. I don't know if that's sufficient when you've got a 3-story building with lights. And then you had mentioned about a 15-foot buffer vegetation. Was that width or height? Width. So it's still not height.
It'll be planted and the trees will grow to maturity, but
Yeah.
we haven't got to that.
How high would they grow?
Depends on the species. I don't know what
Well, it'd be nice to have some guarantee that it would be higher than 6. If I got a 3-story building and a 6-foot fence, it'd be nice to have something higher than 6 feet. That's all I have. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Jerry Pierce.
Mr. Chairman, members of the planning board, my name is Jerry Pierce. I'm a member of the Waterford National Residential Association Board. I have sent the town a letter with some comments in it. Hopefully you have gotten it. I would like to turn it over to the, you've got your copy?
Yes, thank you.
I apologize for some typographical errors in it. I was in a hurry to get it done, but I do appreciate that. I wanted to go over the 8 items that I brought up in the letter to you today. The first one, we've talked a lot about the parking. Certainly, no secret, they admit there's 812 spaces required, 752 provided. My only concern for the board is if you waive it down to 752, you're going to have more apartments coming in, or you're going to waive the parking requirements for every one that you do in the future. So, you know, there's a process that you can go through to take into special consideration of parking spaces, but the only thing I ask you is to consider, are you willing to waive the parking requirements for all apartment complexes instead of just this one? So that's my only concern about that. The second issue is related to the drainage, and I wish we had the aerial photo. If somebody has a map, and if I could get Tim to come up here. Okay. I have a question for you. Yes, sir. Somebody have a set of plans? Or do I need the plans?
Yeah.
And is this the same plans that was submitted with the site plan, with the application? Because I understand there's been a revised one.
That's the revised.
But the revisions were not, major items.
Okay, on this sheet, C31.
Yes, sir.
Where is the stormwater going?
Stormwater goes into 2 existing catch basins that were provided by the,
Is this going into water?
I believe it does, yes, sir.
It is not permitted to do that.
It is permitted to do that.
I can assure you that the Waterford Master Stormwater Permit does not include any impervious surface area on this property.
Well, the permit, the
So
state has a different opinion, so.
I have looked at our permit,
The state has a different opinion.
and this site is included in the Waterford Master Permit. You're not a part of the association, you're not part of the commercial association, so you're not paying us to maintain the stormwater system. So I'm confused by that. So I certainly would encourage the board, because I will tell you that Waterford would strongly object any more water coming into our subdivision, particularly if it's not permitted and designed to do so. K3 Engineering did a great design of our system. we, you know,
The
it works
impervious,
pretty well.
the impervious surface is included in the permit. I don't know about who's paying dues, but the impervious surface
Well-
is, because they put 2 catch basins that connect to the existing Waterford system. These are just the 2 that we're talking about, just so everybody's looking.
This was a flared-in section here.
They are connected to the system.
Where's that going? It's a flared-in section. You show no ditch.
It's connected to the system.
I will tell you,
Yes, sir.
tell the board, not tell you, but tell the board,
Objection,
Waterford
he's not
code.
an expert. The state's in charge of the stormwater permits.
Duly noted.
Actually, the
Mr.
town of
Pierce.
Leland, it says we're in the town of Leland. We'll argue.
Are you a professional engineer?
I am a professional engineer in the state of North Carolina and South Carolina, and I have designed stormwater ponds. I have knowledge of stormwater issues, but I'm not here to argue about the stormwater design. I'm just saying it's my understanding that this site is not part of the Waterford Master Residential Association stormwater permit, and if it is not, we would violently object to water coming from this site into our stormwater system. And it's just an aside, you know, you don't show where this water's going. You show a flared-in section here, and you don't show a ditch to say where it's going at all. You don't show the outlet pipe over here. Is it properly sized? You don't say what size pipe is going out here.
Based on the information provided by the landowner, that we use the existing drainage area that was provided by them. At this point, we've not got the plan revision to the state.
Well, but what size pipe is going over to Waterford?
I mean, I believe it was an 18-inch pipe, but I'll have to.
Is that adequate
But
size for this
It was
stormwater?
adequate based on what the amount of impervious area. We will actually have to double check what Cape for Engineering did, but it was sized by Cape for Engineering, which who put their seal on it.
Well, I will say then we have a disagreement as to whether it is permitted or not. And, you know, I would encourage the board to make sure, because that is a deal breaker for us.
Where are you discussing?
I'm sorry.
I see outlet structure
Sorry,
going
sorry.
to the south, not north.
No, let's look at the southernmost track. It's should C1. I wish we had it. Look at C631. It's this catch basin here. This catch basin here. And there's a flared-in section here. A flared-in section is typically at the end of a pipe. You agree? There would be a ditch somewhere associated with that?
Or a future pipe connection.
You said 3-1?
C31.
C3.
Up here, right there.
That says drop inlet.
That's a drop inlet, but where does it go? No, it goes the other way.
It goes into.
He says it's going into water.
It
doesn't show a pipe.
I mean, we didn't.
It doesn't show a pipe.
You're right, it looks like there is no outlet. I would disagree with that.
Well, the outlet goes into the, there's 408,000 square feet of impervious allocated for this lot.
Okay, at least I'm talking about it.
Yeah, so I mean, it's most likely stated on the plans that it's, that amount of impervious is allocated. But regardless, the knowledge that we provided, it says 408,000 square feet of impervious area has been allocated to this lot into an existing permit.
Well, that certainly can be checked with the state. Certainly you can assign something to the town that says that, and certainly if you could provide it to me, I would appreciate
Yes, sir.
that as well.
Yes, sir.
So that, but it's my understanding
They'll have to get state stormwater permits.
But the question is, where's the water going? He's designed the pond for the other side, which is great. I don't have a problem with that. This side, he's sending it into the Waterford existing system, and, you know, at least my contention is, it is not permitted. But let's move on. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Number 3, section 6.14 of Belville zoning ordinance requires a turn lane or deceleration lane to be constructed when the development sees 50 units. There was no turn lane provided. So that might be something we want to do.
the purpose of my review, to be honest with you, is to assist the town to make sure that this development conforms with your zoning ordinance. You know, I've got 45 years municipal experience, so I can tell you that's my, you know, I don't want you to do something that you will regret later on. Section 9 requires that all wetlands on the site and impacted areas must be delineated and shown. I've heard that the wetlands delineation was done. Was one done?
Yes.
Okay. So if you could just provide a copy of that to the town so they have it.
Were there any wetlands on site? None.
Typically it would be in the ditch out front. I would be, if that's where it would be. We talked, the consultant talked about bicycle parking. Does require 17 bicycle parking spaces. We didn't see those on the plan. We talked about tree protection. Has anybody seen a tree protection plan? We did not see one on the plan. How do you, huh? It was not in the set of plans I got. So,
It's a landscape plan, I wouldn't say a tree protection plan.
but there was a tree protection plan, and somebody was talking about, well, you got to cut down all the, how did you know where the heritage trees and the specimen trees are if you didn't get a tree protection plan? Interesting. So I understand that they got to cut trees down, but that is one of the things they should have provided to you is where the trees are, so you can make a conscious decision that says, yes, this tree has to be cut down for them to be able to build this project. No, it doesn't have to be cut down. And I think all of you want to preserve the heritage trees and specimen trees in your ordinance. On the landscape buffers, it says landscape buffers shall be provided along all park lines, it's on the BR and all the other ones, when such park lines are located in R10 or R15. I disagree with the zoning, with the planning consultant. In my years of experience, when two jurisdictions abut each other, you look at equivalent zoning. Okay, so Leland has R6, you have R10 and R15. What is the Leland zoning destination that is close to your R10 and R15, and then you set that requirement? You just can't say, because that's in Leland, no buffer requires, in my opinion. So, you know, my experience has been, you know, you look at equivalent zoning. So if it's R10 in Leland or in Belville, it's R6, they might be the same. So you look at similar classifications when you abut. It's the same thing if Belville abuts the county. County has different zoning than Belville. And so you just can't say, we're only looking at the zoning in Belville. You have to sort of look at what is the zoning in the surrounding jurisdictions as well, where you have those overlaps. And finally, I appreciate what the lady did on the traffic, but the manager has the authority to do a traffic impact analysis. I believe you did not do a traffic impact analysis, is that correct?
I performed a traffic study.
But not a traffic impact analysis per the DOT standards.
I used the DOT standards. It's not being submitted to the DOT, but we can.
Well, I would recommend
Objection, it wasn't a requirement.
the manager can require you to do a
It wasn't
TIA.
a requirement.
Huh?
It wasn't a requirement.
I am saying that the manager can require it, the board of commissioners, or the town board could require it, whoever would require it. And certainly, I would encourage you to do that. I know it's not a requirement.
You're recommending.
I am recommending it to you, but it is not a requirement, I admit that. But I am saying that you have in your ordinance, and I'm not sure how many trips that the study shows, but my estimation of the traffic impact of this is 3,246 trips per day coming out of this thing that's fully developed. And so that's a whole lot of trips. And so I appreciate your time. Thank you very much. Any questions for me?
May I ask a couple?
Sure.
Mr. Pierce, have you looked at the table of uses for the zoning, the current zoning of the property?
Yes, sir. Well, no, I have not. I've heard what they said about it. It's a group home.
Group home.
But I've heard that, yes.
Okay. And prior to it, it was just recently rezoned. Prior to it being rezoned, you knew what the zoning was?
I assume it was industrial.
It's industrial.
Right.
And have you looked at permitted uses for industrial?
No, I have not.
Uh,
I know that you like to be good neighbors. And so I'm trying to make sure that you comply with the town of Belville's zoning ordinance. That protects you, that protects the planning board and the town. Because if you don't comply with the town ordinance, then, you know, that's not good for either one of you. So you want to make sure that you do the things that the town's ordinance requires.
I heard you mention adult entertainment establishment. Are you aware that?
Well, sir, Mr. Pierce, Mr. Pierce, let me interject here.
Yes, sir.
Your line of questioning, how does that help with the discussion on whether we should approve this permit? Because we're not considering a strip club on this parcel.
Any other questions?
No, I'm done.
Okay.
Thank you,
Any other
sir.
questions from the applicant? Thank you very much.
All right, the next individual to address the board is Carol Huber. Ms. Huber, you come forward.
Hi, my name's Carol Huber. I have a property on lot 15, Golden Sands Way. I believe that somebody told you that it was approximately 25 homes along the property line. I believe it's more like 33 homes that will be affected by this apartment complex. This is going 3 different developments, so that's a big difference of 8 other homes. These homes along this line are valued approximately $350,000 up to $600,000. I have a couple different things. Please bear with me, I'm a little nervous here. First off, when I purchased my home 3.5 years ago, I knew by my realtor that it was zoned Belville as industrial, and that was fine with me. If I believe correctly with Belville, their plan was if it was industrial, there would be a big barrier behind my fence all the way into the property line of something like 40 feet, a barrier. There was a big, longer barrier than this 10-foot. Also, there was caps on height and all. Now, when I was here in July, I was only here in July. July went from industrial to BR, and if I understand correctly, and tell me if I'm wrong, it was supposed to be capped at 35 feet, this apartment complex. And that was what was voted on, and that's the last that I heard of that until tonight, and that I heard that this now, all of a sudden, it was a special ordinance that approval that you guys gave it up to 40 feet, these apartment complex. An extra 5 foot is an extra 5 foot when you're standing on the ground looking up at these apartments. I think things like this should be considered. Again, in July, over and over with the attorney and others, I kept hearing that Belville would be a good neighbor. This doesn't seem to be happening, and I'm concerned about that. Once this gets done, it's done. You guys can go on, and we are stuck with it. We are stuck with it. We're human beings that have worked hard, just like all of you, to save our money to be able to buy these homes. These weren't just given. We worked our butts off hard to be able to live here. I have no problem with people living in apartments. I have a problem with, if you look at my lot, and I know the other 33 other homes have issues too, but I'm going to use me as an example. Lot 15 on Golden Sands Way, if you would please look at that. I have, just like everybody else, a 6-foot fence that goes the whole length. what I have abutted up to half of me with the easement access is about 8, 10 parking lots. So as they pull in, their headlights are going to be coming into my backyard. My house sits back deeper into the lot. So I'm going to have in my bedroom headlights coming in.
How tall is your fence?
6 feet. Okay, thank you.
Is it solid?
It's just a wood that the hurricane already has messed with. Okay? So another hurricane comes through, that goes down, we're going to have a full view. All right? Thank you for asking that. The other side of my fence is going to be a slightly angled parking garage. And in front of those parking lots is a full frontal view apartment complex, all homes looking towards my backyard. And I'm going to assume that I don't know what these apartments look like. All those people up there, how many there are going to be, are going to have balconies facing my backyard, let alone most of these other people. I'm trying to give you a visual of, I'm sure you all live in nice homes, and you would consider how you would feel if all of a sudden you go out to grill and there are people there looking at you, playing their music, doing their own grilling, putting their Christmas lights on that could end up being there until May. I mean, we've seen apartments in different places. People don't take their lights down, leave it on houses. This is something I want you to consider. This is why everybody's so upset. The other thing I have to say is there will be an increase in noise. There will be an increase in lights. There will be a devaluation of our properties. That is a fact. That is a fact. Consider it, please. When this plan is drawn up, if more than a 6-foot barrier, more like a 20-foot barrier going across the whole property line, not a 6-foot tree, that's going to be as tall as my fence. We need something taller. Again, this is ground level. Look up 40 feet while you're out there grilling, while you want to lay in the sun, while you want to play bocce in your backyard. And realize these people are going to be watching you, making comments, having a good time, enjoying their brewskis too. Consider that. We're all living in this, and we need to consider this, please. The other last thing I think is for the appraiser. Now, I could not hear you well, and of course your back was towards us, understandably, because you're facing the board. But what I was hearing was the studies that you used were Greater Wilmington, not Leland, not Belville, not Bolivia, not any of these more centralized, newer communities, but Greater Wilmington, and one year at least it sounded like these studies were 20 years old. Isn't there something newer? Isn't there something that could be conducive and to what is happening right now? Is there apartments with houses bordering one whole side that are valued $350,000 to $600,000? Can you give a study? Can a study be done that's more accurate?
Actually, can I respond to that? That's actually very much, the project was very comparable. As an analyst, that's what we have to do, is we have to find what's most comparable. So the study is most comparable to what's going on here now. And it was directly blocks that abut in an apartment complex that was built right next to it. So the idea when you do appraising is that you have to see things that are comparable and choose what's most comparable.
How old were these studies? What was the most recent? I mean, not your study, but that you were comparing.
The study goes on all the sales, there's analysis that goes through all the sales that have happened since the park was established. Since the park was, since the park was established, since it's one study,
So these,
until the present, yeah.
if you want a copy of the report, these are, looks like the properties.
It shows over time how it has been affected. So you have to go back over time to show from then until now to get an idea.
Look at my copy. And I apologize for interrupting this. Miss Root, I believe, mentioned something about Hawthorne Apartments. Is that the same builder as Hawthorne? Because I think I noticed that one of the properties you looked at was the Hawthorne at Lucia Point. Is that, so
Yes.
same builder, same,
Yeah.
does that have to be the same design as this, or does anybody know?
We haven't gotten that far yet.
That's the one on,
I thought we were talking earlier about property values not being able to be discussed by
I was gonna
lay
say-
people. Is that not what, is that not?
her
what-
testimony about it is disregarded, but her questions for your witness would be competent evidence, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Okay, well, thank you. Again, it's, just wanted to reiterate, the barrier, the sound, consider the lights, the noise, the traffic, it will have an effect. That's a fact. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, that is all the individuals that signed up to address the board in opposition to this application. Is there any other comments from the applicant or any of the opposing parties that has any rebuttals or any closing statements? they want to make?
How long is 20 feet? I mean, can we show that here so we can see the difference between my fence and where they might have a building?
Well, without a measuring device, it would be hard to do that.
Or maybe from me to you is 20 feet?
I have no way to verify that, sir.
I'm just, it's good to maybe have a visual instead of just hearing 20 feet to say, here's my fence in my backyard and here's somebody's, I'm going to be next to the pool. So, it would be nice to know there's some sort of buffer.
Anyone from the applicant side?
It's late, I'm going to keep this brief.
Okay.
All the competent evidence that you've heard tonight, all the requirements have been met to grant a special use permit for that.
I caution the board, I think this is in the directions that you get once the applicant makes a prima facie showing on the elements, on the ones, then, this is one of those strange situations where technically the applicant has the burden. But once they make a showing on all the numbers, or all the numbers 1 through 9, the burden shifts to any opponent to offer, as Professor Owens calls it, competent material and substantial evidence. So basically, if they've made a showing on all the things you can't deny a permit for any reason, it has to be a good one. It has to be supported by competent material and substantial evidence. And that's going to be the question for the board, is that.
If there's no other closing arguments, I would like to see the exhibit of the appraisal. You have that hand, so I can look at that.
That's been marked as E. I'll give you my copy.
Okay. I just want to look at the comp plan.
Could we make
Since there was a lot of discussion about that.
You have a spare?
I think I.
Is there any other exhibits that the board members like to review? Okay.
I'm sorry, what?
Mr. Boyd's trying to keep me straight on our order of business up here, as far as summarizing the evidence. Yeah, I know you were making notes, so I'm hoping you'll be able to address that piece.
If you want, I'll go through my checklist here. I think
If you would, we'll go ahead and move forward while we're waiting on copies.
Just to summarize, to start off with, Athena Williams gave the staff a report. The points that I noted here were that she discussed the amenities and the staff's conclusion the project complied with requirements, the requirements imposed by the code. The second witness was the applicant offered testimony from Mr. Schuler, Brad Schuler, an engineer from Paramount. Mr. Schuler, and I apologize, I don't have the world's greatest notes on his. The one note that I made, he went through the checklist and explained the applicant's contention that it met all of the specific requirements. Pointed out that it abuts, this is business residential, it abuts industrial uses and business uses. Made the point that this provided a type of, and I'm trying to think of the word he used, a transition from those uses to residential, which I think is the idea behind the business residential designation in our code, is that it provides some flexibility and allows for multifamily of this sort that wouldn't fit in a R10 or R15 and doesn't really neatly fit into industrial either. The next, also he pointed out that there is one area of non-compliance that would be required parking, but pointed out that there were offsetting benefits in the area of additional green space and less impervious surface. The next witness was Ms. Rocks. You have her report. The short summary of it was that Ms. Rock's professional opinion was that there wouldn't be any substantial impact, positive or negative, based on her survey of similar properties. The next witness was Ms. Cheebs from Rainey Camp, the traffic engineer. I believe that's the same traffic engineering firm that offered the analysis for the thing we discussed at the technical review meeting this afternoon. She indicated that Old Waterford Way, I believe the intersection there had a deficiency, but I believe it was in the afternoon, or it was in the afternoon, and pointed out that the outgoing traffic that would use that intersection from a place like this would happen to be heavier in the morning when people were coming out. And obviously in the afternoon when people were coming home, when you have heavier traffic, they weren't hitting that point that was that was your observation.
And there's also a current plan to upgrade that intersection.
I forgot that. Mr. Clinkscales is a surveyor. Also, my notes are that he also addressed the issue about parking and the requirements of parking. Then the next witness after that Mr. Capadona briefly spoke, and I apologize, I don't have good notes about Mr. Capadona's things other than that he discussed buffering and the staff opinion about the ambiguity in.
He also gave testimony on issue of parking.
Then the landowner opponents, the first one, my notes indicate, was Nancy Freeberger, whose house abuts the property on the back side, had concerns about the light intrusion at night. Also mentioned some concerns about impervious surface and questioned whether or not the property values would be impacted. And I've got, is it Dr. Tamarus? Tamaru. Dr. Tamaru. Dr. Tamaru is a property owner who abuts the western side of the property, also happens to be a realtor with Intracoastal, has experience in the local market here, and he testified that in his opinion, developments of this sort do negatively impact abutting properties. Now, noted in this that one of the basis for that opinion he gave was the National Association of Realtors publication. And I noticed that the applicants had several questions about whether, not the applicants, the opponents had questions about whether the surveyor, Ms. Rock's testimony was competent because it dealt with properties in Wilmington. And I noted that the same issue could be made with respect to Dr. Tamaru's observation. It wasn't specific to
Ms. Rock is
area
an
either.
appraiser, not a surveyor.
Right. Well, and he also, Mr. Tamaru had concerns about noise pollution and light pollution at night. And also mentioned that in his observation as a police officer, apartment complexes tended to have higher levels of crime than single-family residential. Ms. Root spoke next. Her property abuts the berm side I have in my notes. She was concerned about the appearance of this particular development not being in conformity with other housing in the area, concerned that it would be an eyesore. She's the one who mentioned that this was a Hawthorne property. The next witness was Ms. Pearl, Doreen Pearl, abutting property. She's property owner, abutting property, building number 11. She was concerned about a lack of buffer, also concerned about the proximity to the garbage container. I think the applicant indicated that to address the concern about the garbage container, they would be willing to move the container, relocate. Correct. And also that there would be some screening for it, the screening that's required by the code. The next witness was Mr. Nielsen, Kirk Nielsen. He is a property owner who's also property abuts this. He was concerned about light and noise from the pickleball court, and noted that light intrusion from cars was a concern that needed to be addressed. He noted that traffic, and I find that odd, the prohibitional opinions about traffic deals with traffic and public safety. I have never really thought about it until I sat here tonight, but it doesn't address the issue about light intrusion from headlights. So while he would not have been competent to testify about safety problems with it, I think that is something that the board may consider if it chooses to do so. The light intrusion from the cars. Finally, not finally, because there's one more. Mr. Pierce, who is a PE in licensing in North and South Carolina, discussed a list of issues that are outlined in his letter to the clerk, which is marked as an exhibit. It should be in the staff packet already, I'm sorry, it's part of Exhibit 1, or Exhibit A. Is that right? Yeah. I think part of Exhibit A, he had 8 specific concerns that are, we've got a better list of those there than I can summarize here. But spoke about those issues. And I highlighted drainage. I think that drainage was a concern that he
Mr. Pierce
stressed.
was also here representing the Waterford
HOA.
HOA.
Not a direct owner, but because of the association, they do have standing since,
Right.
I think the way the statute reads now, if one of the members have standing, the HOA can have someone speak. But I believe he also pointed out that the HOA owns common area with the spots. Is that correct? Okay. Finally, Ms. Huber spoke with, her primary areas of emphasis were light and sound impacts on the neighboring properties, as well as visual impacts from upstairs people being able to see down into the apartments, and the other way around as well, I think. She basically testified about the impact on the neighbors of that sort. Did I get everybody? Didn't take the best notes in the world, but I think that's where we are.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Blanchard. All right. Well, now that we have heard everyone's testimony and the evidence that's been presented, the board, we have a special use permit decision worksheet. Everyone should have that in front of them. And there's 9 different items that the board needs to consider. And procedurally, I think the way this works is we go through each item and the board will come to a consensus or a vote as to whether it will or will not meet the findings of fact based on the statement. Mr. Blanchard, at any time if I'm stating incorrectly, please interject.
If you find that there's conflicting evidence on a particular issue, you know, again, you're sitting kind of as a fact finder here as well. You get to resolve the dispute about which one you find more persuasive on an issue. And I'll give you an example. There was some testimony that, there's certainly competent testimony from the applicant on property value, on the lack of any impact that wouldn't impact property values. But the opponents, a couple of people, I think, without objection testified that appeared to qualify, have specialized knowledge on real estate values. That would be a type of conflict in the evidence that you get to resolve. So,
as I like to say, this is the heavy lifting piece of this meeting. So, it is the board's conclusion that the special use will or will not materially endanger the public's health or safety if located where proposed, and this conclusion is based upon the following findings of fact.
I'm looking for my report sheet.
I'll let you.
I'll start off, I guess. I'll say it will not endanger the public's health or safety, finding that fact being they are meeting town requirements and will be obtaining necessary permits required by the town and state.
I want to stress something also. On some of these findings of fact, you can note the absence of evidence, if that makes sense. Oh, thank you. You can weigh them that way as well. So, for example, if nobody had come in and offered testimony about the impact on value, you would be able to find, you know, be able to find against the applicant on that by pointing out, well, there was no evidence offered on this, that it would harm things. So, anyway, back to where you're going.
Yeah, Mr. Gordon, continue.
That's it, number one.
Okay.
That was, just when I start off the discussion, that's my opinion.
Okay, well,
But is this the safety of the others around them? Is that what they're doing?
Yes.
public
health,
Period. Safety, period. And I think that deals with the community at large as well. And that's kind of the catch-all one.
well, I guess I'm gonna be in the dissenting voice, because I do have a concern about the uncertainty of the status of the wastewater permit regarding the drainage issues. Because if that has not been fully vetted, and with this project of this size being built there, that water has to go somewhere. And
That may be more appropriate for number 2 than number
Okay.
1, but.
That's where I was going.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, let me finish my statement in that, because, you know, where that water moves, it doesn't know, town limits, Belville or Leland. And so, I looked at it as a safety concern, that's why I wanted to place it.
But
on
like I said,
number
there's a
one.
lot of times, there's a lot of overlap there.
Right,
You can-
but if it's more appropriate for it to be listed under 2, so be it.
Perfectly fine, either one. Like I said, there's a lot of overlap in these. That, you know, the same type of evidence will sometimes cover 2 or 3 different topics. So it looks like you've got 1 vote yes and 1 vote no on that so far. Mr. Williams? I can't hear you.
No conflict.
No comment.
On number 1.
And
I
obviously-
don't see where it's detrimental to the health or safety.
Okay, so we've got 2.
Like that.
Other board members?
I'll go ahead and say it will not affect safety. I know health or safety.
You speak up, please.
It will not affect health and safety. I don't.
I just have some issues with understanding the height of the buffers, and what will go, for this. To me, that's a safety factor. If the height of the buffers are not correct, and not established, and what will be planted there.
So it will or
I
will
mean, if
not.
we can establish something that
Well, I think it's the conditions. Do we wait till the end to start talking about conditions of approval, or do we just talk about it now?
You,
Both?
you have a spot at the end to talk about conditions. If that's your suggestion that you find
I
yes,
think that would help.
provided that you have a condition of X,
the only person
you
in
can
this
do that.
conference.
What's that?
Looks like Mr. Papadona may have dropped off the call.
I mean, just based on what you've heard,
Dial again so he
I
can.
mean, the answer is will or will not materially endanger public health and safety.
Well, as the plan stands now, without any buffers, then yeah, I mean, that would also, yes, will. If buffers are in place and we establish that, then I think that would say no, so it will not at this point.
And I want to stress, when we talk about material means something more than de minimis. Does that make sense? It's you know, it has to be an important issue, not, and I think, Mr. Milligan, your observation about drainage, that can certainly be an important issue in some instances. So as it stands right now, it looks like we're at 1, 2, 3, 4. Is that a majority?
Page.
Ms. Page?
I'm gonna say will not, but I do wanna be able to address conditions.
Conditions.
You know, I agree. Yeah. So they kind of already agreed to,
Right.
but we need to definitely discuss it.
Right.
Well, for this one, unlike variance, you only need a simple majority. So,
Okay. Yeah, but for the record, I would like for all the board members to vote.
They've got an obligation to.
He's gonna join if you're there.
It's fine.
Will not. Sweetie, you getting? Keeping track of the votes here.
We're trying to get Mr. Capadoni back.
Six one.
Okay.
All right, we'll move on to item
You're
2.
putting you back on the speaker. Just fine.
Okay. It's the board's conclusion that a special use meets or does not meet all the required conditions and specifications. This conclusion is based upon the following findings of fact. I say it does not because it does not meet the parking space requirement as provided for in our ordinance.
I would say it does meet, even with the parking, as was the testimony given. You know, this is not a one house per car development. This is a multi-family development. The apartment's not necessarily, one unit isn't going to have 4 cars. One unit's likely to have 1 or 2 cars. It's just 3 bedroom. Or 1 unit. It's likely to only have 1 car. Anyways, that's my opinion. I also wanted to state they are providing less density than required, or as permitted. And that one of the conditions, of course, is they're going to be obtaining necessary state and local permits moving forward. That's my opinion.
I just want to remind the audience as we're working through this process, if you would, please refrain from making comments. Okay? Thank you.
I would say it does not meet the requirements due to the parking. I mean, to make special ruling with parking. And the other thing is the wastewater.
Stormwater, wastewater.
Stormwater, yeah. Do we send it to our neighbors? Do we, create,
Where does it go?
I think it does not meet for a couple of reasons. One is drainage. I'd like to know where that pipe is going and where. You just can't shoot water over to your neighbor these days. It doesn't work. And the parking issue is not an issue with me. But the drainage is.
I think the drainage is an issue for sure. Just, I guess, confirmation of where it's going. I personally seen Northford in a lot of water and some past hurricanes. The parking, the one the parking space might be fine. That might be a special exception. I don't think it meets the ordinance. If the ordinance say this is what happens, but I don't really have an issue with the parking. That's more the water. And that's my main thing is the water.
What,
It does not.
any particular area of concern for
I
drainage?
just has something about the drainage in my mind. I don't think that was really clarified well enough that we said that.
Ms. Page?
Well, now, we don't know what the specifications are for the water. That was not made clear.
Okay. 7.
Is that 6-1?
Yes.
5-2, which one are we on? Is that everybody?
That's everybody. Okay.
right, let's move on to the third one.
Right, it's the board's conclusion that the special use will or will not substantially injure the value of adjoining and abutting and adjacent properties unless the use is found to constitute a public necessity. This conclusion is based upon the following findings of fact. I will say it will not, based on the expert testimony from our certified appraiser. There was no one else that was an expert in that field that gave testimony against or to the fact that it would have a negative impact.
I agree, will not.
I'll agree.
I agree.
Agree.
Based on the evidence presented and lack of rebuttal. Thank you.
All right, so all board members agreed will not substantially injure. And that's based on the appraisal testimony. Moving on to number 4.
All right, it's the board's conclusion that the location and character of the special use that's developed according to the application will or will not be harmonious with the area where it will be located and in the general conformity with the comprehensive plan and other applicable plans. This conclusion is based upon the following findings of fact. Well, I'm looking at my notes here. I would have to say, as the plan is presented at this time, it would not be harmonious because of the buffer issues and the distance between some of the structures on the proposed property and the adjacent property owners.
Now, what happens if we change hopes, so we get to the conditions, and they agree to a buffer? Does that
Turn around and
so we
revisit the issue.
Okay.
We're not done with this yet.
Yes, okay.
That's why I said based on the
Yeah,
application
I know.
presented.
And you can certainly, you can approve it with a condition.
Right, right.
And you could say, I find it does, provided that X.
Yeah. Well, then I'll comment on it. I think it will be harmonious. One, from testimony given, speaking of the transition, speaking of going from commercial to industrial to single family, a multi-family development is a nice in-between instead of going straight industrial to a single family, which it would have been before. So I think that makes it harmonious, and also with the hopeful condition of some sort of landscape buffering, at least being 15 feet as was discussed, and then we need to get more into larger trees as that will grow in this buffer. But my vote is will.
I'm kind of there as well, with a better focus on what we're going to do for buffers and tree preservation. The number of heritage trees or vintage trees that are there, what we can do to save as many as possible.
I say it will be harmonious with some conditions that being buffer, trees, lighting.
It will be based on conditions.
So keep it there, level one with the conditions we say it will be.
You can condition your approval on a requirement like that. You certainly can. That's why it's called a conditional use.
But it will be.
It would.
As it is presented right now.
Well, I'm saying you can you're allowed to do that and say, I'll vote yes on this provided that we have this condition.
Do you want to list all the conditions? We're talking about that later.
We'll get to the conditions at the end. And from what I'm hearing, there is a consensus to include buffering, right?
Sounds like it.
Oh, yes.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Conditions. Approval based on conditions being met, and that's lighting as well.
Like,
Try to keep my notes here. All right, so is that 6-1 or 7-0 with condition?
I didn't offer any conditions. I said as the application was presented, it would not leave amendments.
Okay.
But, and I'm gonna leave it there. I'm still open
Okay.
to conditions, but based on just how it reads, according to the application.
And the next one, number 5, is
Number 5 is the board's conclusion that special use will or will not be injurious to the permitted use and enjoyment of other properties in the vicinity of the subject property. This conclusion is based upon the following findings of fact.
and that's a classic one where you put in a condition to, that's, I said, there's a lot of overlap between these.
Yes, there is.
Yeah.
Just as an aside, a lot of towns only have 4 prongs, not 9, so.
That 160
Times have changed.
160.
On that one for me,
can we define injurious?
yeah,
I don't know what that word means.
That means harmful.
yeah.
Okay.
Not actually injured.
Okay.
Right. Will it interfere with the enjoyment, use and enjoyment, the permitted use and enjoyment of other properties?
That's happening all over. That's everywhere. But that's not even the-
Causing or likely to cause damage or harm.
When we talk about the conditions, that's when we can talk about mitigating
Sure
whether or
can.
not it's injurious.
And you're actually allowed, like I said, at this point to say that, you know, I would find that it would not if we have the condition X, or it's up to you. You can go either way on that.
Conditions that to mitigate injury.
I'm having a hard time hearing you. I apologize.
It's hard to approve these as they're written without us agreeing on the
On the
conditions that we are
conditions.
going to consider and approve.
Yes.
So injurious, if we don't have any mitigating factors in
I'll
place.
tell you what, if it makes it easier under these circumstances, if you want to talk about conditions that you would improve,
Yeah,
because it sounds like that's impacting,
well, it is, because if you're,
Mr. Chair, you may want to just go straight to what conditions would you guys be?
right,
you know,
because based on that statement, as it's presented, I believe it would be harmful.
Yeah.
But there are some conditions that can be put in place
Well, then it's,
to either remove
you
or
can
reduce
skip around on
that.
this if you'd like to. You don't,
So-
you're not, you know, set in stone. You have to go through voting on everyone before you talk about conditions that you think would be helpful. You can talk about those right now if you'd like.
I think
Go through it.
that may be helpful.
Yeah, I think
We'll talk about conditions then. What would be good condition?
So, well, things that come to mind is, the lighting has been talked about, as far as those, we're in and around the buildings, but also in the common areas of the project, the pickleball courts, so forth. That needs to be addressed. The buffering.
Stay on that. Go ahead. I'm just thinking we can get specific, say,
Yeah.
you know, the foot candles should not exceed the property boundary. It should be at a 0.
Okay.
There should be no light pollution leaving the site. Seemed to be was agreed upon. I think that should be a condition. Property owner, there should be no light, from the property going out outside.
And then the buffer.
Right.
Well,
Buffer. The lighting for drainage, and then where that other water's gonna go. And what can be done about it?
as far as noise pollution, I mean, there are acoustic walls and such that can be, get into a lot of.
For example, if you're concerned about drainage, you could have that as a condition, ensure that it's in compliance with whatever permitting requirements.
Yeah.
That's
Maybe we
one
just
way to
start with
resolve
one
your
thing.
concerns.
Yeah, that's
about
what
it.
you were jumping a lot.
Yeah, let's go lighting, and then
Just
go
name
buffer,
it.
and then like, what's the condition I'm putting for lighting?
You started talking about lighting, is that, Mr. Boyd, you
Yeah,
indicated?
no foot candles, there should be no light pollution leaving the site. So at the property boundary,
I don't know.
It doesn't.
we need to provide a lighting plan showing the light foot candles at our property boundary, being at 0.
Is that possible?
I don't understand.
So, yeah, we
You said
can
the
provide,
electric company makes some of the decisions.
that's correct. They'll provide a lighting plan. That's why I clarify this will be for the street lights that this will be applied to.
This will not apply to the buildings themselves that shine straight down. Well, I'm not talking car traffic.
Right. So I mean, the street lighting is where we would get the lighting plan
Okay.
from
What
things.
about the buildings?
The building itself, the roof, I would need to, those would be shielded in a downwards direction, and then obviously we can't control any lighting to the windows.
Right, no, that's right, right.
But,
Unless you pull the button.
Do you typically light the full perimeter of each building?
No, sir. I would defer to the client.
Only typically at the entries, sconce on either column. Our folks don't want bright lights in their units either, just as a neighbor.
Well, and that was a concern with a comment that was made of one of the close proximity tenants there is lighting from the building, but if the building is that tall, and there's no lighting in the back.
Correct. So no light exceeding the property line from the buildings or street lighting.
I would have to confirm the building lighting. I think we can agree that it will be shielded where it has to shine in a downward
Going
direction.
down, it would be that part, right?
Yeah. Is that what you're asking for it to be shielded?
Right, yes.
Yes, the buildings we will.
Okay, shielded. Okay, yes.
Downwards, and then the street lighting will actually do the foot candle
Okay.
plan. So those are much more intensive
Right.
lights and that.
Showing no
No.
pollution outside the property boundary.
At the boundary, it would have to be at a 0-foot candle.
Yes.
And then there's no lighting after the pickle after certain times, right?
So in the pickle, we're willing to relocate that on the opposite side. We heard a lot of concerns here. We're willing to relocate that to the southern side of the development in order to mitigate those concerns.
That's a good idea.
And that for the dumpster, that will also be relocated to another portion away from that boundary as well.
The second and third, you're moving faster than us here.
So I think we're pretty clear on the lighting.
Okay, yep, yes. And I do like the condition of the pickleball court being on this other side. Yes, on the other side of the amenity, away from the single-family property owners.
And the dumpster being moved, it's a voluntary offer on that.
Yes, relocating the dumpster so it's not adjacent to those single-family homeowners.
So back to, we've disposed of the lighting issue and pickleball and dumpster movement, buffering, concerns about that?
Yes. I'd like to hear what they're willing to do for buffering.
There's a couple of concerns there. One of them was to block the light that shine down into individual homes. And the other one is just for visibility, to block visibility, so they have privacy. And if the trees that they're gonna plant are this tall, and it's gonna take 5 years for them to grow, that's not good.
It depends on what they plant. I just grew a living hedge. I planted one this year. And it'll be 15 feet tall and 3. It depends on what you
Right,
plant.
some of what they've got planted big will grow. Will grow faster, but I think I was trying to visualize, like, on the backside of Magnolia, there's like a berm that goes by that development. Like there's a, and then they planted stuff on top of that. Is what I was visualizing when y'all told me, but I don't know if I'm right about that. But only one side has the berm, not the east and the west, right? Right.
Half the property.
Half the property has a berm,
West side has the berm.
and the
West side does
one
not.
does not. So we're a little more concerned about the one with no berm.
Right.
That's where we've discussed a possible 15-foot landscape buffer, which I believe they could be agreed to.
15-foot
They
wide.
mentioned 15 feet
15
wide.
foot wide.
They were talking about width.
Yeah, wide. Now, height,
Height.
I would defer to someone else on planting, so. I mean, we need trees
What do
in.
we do about height?
We would work with the town on the right planting materials for height. That's not the board.
And none of us are landscapers or experts in that field, so unless someone.
I can tell you some things that are gonna grow.
There's some things that will grow pretty fast.
But yeah, so we're
agree with
that.
If we could just, Mr. Chairman, if I may, to say the trees at maturity have to be at a certain height, and the shrubs that are provided at maturity have to be at a certain height. So that gives a little leeway on the species. We can work with the town and figure out what's a good species, but at maturity, they would reach a certain height. So you can say the planted buffer at maturity would have to be at least 10 feet tall. Like a waxwork, for example, gets to 10 to 15 feet tall. Your trees, for example, can get up to 20 feet, 30 feet tall.
Or the requirements going down to down at a certain height already.
I know that's the hard part when it comes to landscaping, because it's
Yeah.
hard to source that, and the bigger you buy them, the harder they stay alive. They die easier the bigger you buy them. So it's always better to plant them at a smaller size and let them grow to maturity. But if we could, it's just a suggestion, if we can just state that it has to be a certain height at maturity, and that will ensure that it will get up to that point.
Jeff, I think had an example, or
Capadon.
yeah, Capadonna, or the thing that, you remember somebody handed out an example of that, was it in the materials he handed out for a meeting a few months ago, showing what a certain height of tree would be to block off the line of sight from a 40-foot tall building?
I think Mr. Avery provided a visual on that
Okay.
before.
If I may, we ran into a similar issue on the property in Surf City, and we're not obligated to, but met with the neighbors, did something similar to what we're discussing here, fence with an evergreen type buffer. I think they were a freight giant, whatever we call it, similar to a Leyland cypress.
Like Leyland cypress.
Similar to.
They don't go.
But
How long is maturity?
30 years.
I'm glad to provide examples, drone photos of that to staff, and they can circulate to members of the board if that would help.
I have a question, and I will direct it to staff, because I can't tell by looking at the site plans here, but and I know there's a couple of residents that from Waterford are here in the audience. The adjacent properties in Waterford that abut the site plan here, proposed site, does everyone in Waterford in their backyards, do they have a fence? I see heads bobbing yes and no. So,
2/3 have fences, there's about a third that has a huge berm that has been built wide, high, and then trees put on top of that. And fence.
What about the properties with no berm?
Fence on top of it.
Is there fences where there's no berm?
6 foot fence.
6 foot.
Yeah.
Okay.
I have 6 foot, it's right here, okay.
A little more.
I'm-
You're not that tall. You're not quite that tall.
I think where ours is, it's maybe.
My question's been answered. Not everyone has a fence in their backyard. That's what I
There you
need
go.
to know.
But
Thank
what I'm
you.
talking about was it when that burned up, I guess, and that burn's already in place.
Yes, but in your plans, it looks like a lot of it's being cut out.
The berms.
We weren't sure, and we didn't get a chance to address that in the plans. That's Ginger Lily Way in my
Right.
area.
And the reason why I asked that question is going back to the number of parking spaces, when the cars that would utilize those parking spaces adjacent to, I'm looking at lot 84, 85, Ms. Huber, spoke, it's your property. So vehicles pulling in there, particularly at night, if folks along that property line do not have a fence, you would have headlights shining into the rear portions of houses, and that's something that I have a concern. I mean, I hear trees and buffers and berms, but I heard no one mention fence. And so I would like that to also be considered. You know, someone mentioned about noise and acoustic walls and so forth, but I don't know if I lived in Waterford if I would want a big acoustic wall.
We want to offer, make a suggestion, finish the fence all the way down to the front.
Okay. Okay.
So
15-foot buffer, with the fence.
So buffering would be fence to berm, and what else?
The fence would be on there, right on the property line, with the 15-foot buffer on our side, with landscaping. With the height of the trees with the top, so you'd have a fence buffer, plus a fence.
You gave it to me.
I'm sorry, don't mean to interrupt, but it's-
I think they've got 15 foot, the buffer is 15 feet
And
wide.
we're gonna,
But they got a plan.
we're gonna plant Leland cypress type evergreen trees along with other lower growing
I
trees.
have Leland's and they're dying because of disease. When you start planting too many,
They said
pass
similar.
it on.
And that one,
Indoor
that's
center.
our glass.
You don't plant this one.
Indoor
I
center.
think we're looking to you guys for the specifics on what height
We
you're looking
we would engage an arborist to make sure we had the correct trees.
Yes.
Legal We're cypress. really talking about height,
Right.
enough to shield and block light.
Mature. Mature.
Tell you what, you willing to leave it to staff to decide that issue about what would be an appropriate tree? Is that okay with you?
Yeah.
That's the way we can, if that's okay with you?
Because we do have in our ordinance, trees,
Yeah.
a table of trees, you know, it can be planted.
But what about height and what about width? I think you just have to put a distance of the height, and that'll determine the tree. And how quick.
And how fast.
You would say something like at least 20 feet of maturity. I don't know.
That'll work. You just gotta come up with some number. Is that sufficient? Does that satisfy you, applicant?
What was the 20 feet of maturity?
Yeah.
For the trees, for the canopy type trees, yeah, so
Yeah.
shrubs would be like 10 feet.
And recall that cars are at ground level, and so, you know, something that's 10 feet tall does a pretty good job of shielding lights from a car as far as vegetation goes.
So what's the limit of the berm? What's the limit there?
I think they agreed to extend the fence to the point that berm,
The
or
height
make
of-
sure that it's fenced.
20 feet of maturity, at least 20 feet of maturity.
With the berm with the tree?
So they're building
No,
a
just the
whole way
fence. I understand, there's an existing berm on the west side, that's gonna be left alone, they're not gonna touch it.
Right.
Then where the berm ends, they're going to install
A fence.
fence
On the rest of
running the rest of the property line.
Continuous.
Then beyond that, a 15-foot landscape buffer
Build a berm all the way
with
down.
planted trees. That will be at least 20
That's,
feet canopy.
that's correct, that's correct.
So they're putting another fence against our fence.
Build a berm all the way
It's
down.
fine.
Yes, that's what, yes.
How
Right.
high is the fence going to be, if I may ask? These are 40-foot homes that are going to be looking down at us.
You can probably imagine, yeah, 6-foot fence.
That's a Mr. Wilson fence. You
That's why they have
know,
20-foot trees.
And we'll have a 20-foot tree.
I guess the fence is to help block from the light.
That blocks your light, your
We have-
What's your working definition of maturity? If it takes 20 years to get 12 feet, that doesn't help me.
Not 20 years.
Well, just can we put a number to it?
It's going to have to be a certain height.
We get to the point of like, I don't think any of us are landscapers, or landscapers to be that, I have no idea how, I mean, if we plant a live oak, it might take 100 years.
Yeah.
We got all the landscape people. They know.
There's certain trees that go faster.
Yes,
But I don't know
And-
if there are.
Yes, but that's what we're going to take into
We
consideration.
leave that to the
That's like
Specialist.
We're willing to leave that to staff.
Yes.
The applicants say to leave it at staff. Are you board okay with that? And then
Yes.
staff
Yes.
determine the suitability of it?
Yes.
Yes.
What happens if you have a 15-foot buffer if there's only a 10-foot setback?
Setback and buffer are different.
I'm sorry?
Setback and a buffer are not the same thing.
I know that, but you're telling me that you're gonna provide a 15-foot buffer, but your setback and a lot of your parking lots and your buildings are 10 foot.
They can't go into that, it's now 15 feet.
But based on the notes I've got right now, there's a consensus that you have that we've dealt with the lighting, one condition. Condition number 2 was the movement of pickleball and the dumpster relocation. And condition number 3 here is going to be buffering, a fence to the berm, and landscaping. Just, right. Is there a consensus of the board on those? Everybody agree?
Yes.
All right,
Height
so
of the tree.
agreed to have staff decide that, right?
Yes.
And the applicant's okay with staff dealing with that, right? Because you're going to have to sign off on the conditions.
Right.
I'm not going to have it written up tonight, but you're going to have to. And I say that because the statute now is written to say that you have to sign on the conditions. Moving on along, number 4. Got a 4th condition. Do you want to deal with the drainage issue that you had concerns about?
Yes.
To verify that drainage is in compliance.
Correct.
Correct. And the reason I'm asking that, will that resolve the issues about non-compliance earlier?
Yes.
What condition would
That it's a current and valid permit.
So,
And the
what I wrote down is the condition of to meet state and town stormwater requirements?
Yes. 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 With the correct permits. Yeah.
So just assure that you have all the proper permitting for
That
the
they meet
drainage.
town and state stormwater requirements.
Now, if we have, and I'm going to go back over these conditions again, so that the board, I've got it correct, that what the board wants. Condition number 1 is the lighting condition, that the lighting will be shielded, the lighting that's installed in the buildings will be shielded down, there's 0-foot candle at the perimeter. All right. Condition number 2 is going to be the movement of the relocation of pickleball and the dumpster. Condition number 3 is going to be buffering that we just discussed. And condition number 4 is that the applicant must ensure that the drainage is properly permitted and in compliance with state and local requirements. Correct. Now, with those 4 conditions, are there any additional conditions before you address whether or not those satisfy your concerns about the matters?
So with the house that's on,
Can I interject really quickly?
the house
Yes.
Sure. Let's cap down.
Well, one of the items that was discussed earlier was bicycle parking. Not that that would be a condition, but that probably does need to be addressed with the finally approved plan.
That was what you meant.
Do you want to include bicycle parking as a requirement, a condition, or not?
Was it already in the plan though?
It wasn't on the plan, was it?
There was
nothing on the plan.
No bicycle rack?
We typically do have bicycle racks sometimes in some of our facilities. We do have take a garage bed and indoor storage. We also have a metal rack we've all seen out from the building. So that's
okay with that as a condition?
For us.
Because that's gonna feed into the issue of whether you're in compliance or not, one of the things they're voting on in a minute.
Correct.
Okay? Applicant okay with it?
Yes.
All right. Board okay with it?
Yes.
All right, so now condition number 5 is bicycle parking. Now, skipping back to it, Mr. Chairman, did you want to ask for a vote again on the ones that the board members had concerns about as the applicant? Application.
Well, I had a concern related to parking, but not bicycles. It was the actual car parking spaces. Because their proposal was 752 versus the 804 required by the ordinance.
Can I address that one?
Sure.
I'm Matt, I'm from Belville. As Brad mentioned, we're in the multifamily business, and not only, I think you mentioned North Carolina, but South Carolina, Tennessee, Georgia, Virginia. We are very confident in the parking ratio that we need. When we say 1.7, again, folks have to remind themselves the unit ratio that we look for is typically, call it 40% one bedrooms, 50% two bedrooms, and a small, and 10% what we're calling threes. That's our standard ratio for us. You may know what we got on the plan here. But for that, 1.7 is more than sufficient for what we need. Some of the progressive municipalities that we worked in, Cary, for example, we started at 1.7, 1.8. They asked us to drop to 1.6 because they wanted the additional impervious, pervious area. So it allowed for a greener product, and that property's thriving. Again, it doesn't do us any favors to underpark our community. So we feel very confident in that count. Correct. I mean, we can fit the parking here if you guys so choose. I just don't think the product's going to look anywhere near like what it is now. And I think a lot of the concerns you're hearing tonight will be exaggerated by the fact that we will have more asphalt. So, exactly.
May I ask one quick question? Is the parking spaces, is garages considered parking spaces?
Yes.
Yes.
Now, don't people usually use those for storage of extra stuff? They don't usually use as a parking space for the car, they use it for boxes.
Our other communities have garages as well. I stand to 1.7 is a great number for us. If that's what we're showing, and we're comfortable with that. You guys are?
I think you're at like 1.8 actually. So you're over that. So that's
Well, I mean, I hear what you're saying, but I disagree. I think we need two parking spaces because your calculation, I guess, is based on just the occupancy of the buildings, but we all know family comes to visit and they take up those parking spaces that residents should be parking in. So, and we have spent extensive time on our parking ordinance to have it written as such, and I'm just not comfortable from deviating from that, especially given the density of this project. Sir?
I'll just add one thing. I'd say the majority of municipalities we work in have a staggered number of parking spaces per bedroom count. So there are not a lot of municipalities I've seen that have across the board certain number of parks per unit. And I think, again, back to the unit ratio that we typically provide, not all apartments are created equal and needing two spaces. So
I don't know if staff has any feeling about that. I think, does Jeff have any suggestion one way or another about it?
Jeff, do you
I
have
will
any comments?
say that, yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
I will say that the current ordinance of 2 spaces per dwelling unit is relatively high to other ordinances I've seen. I think Wilmington in some cases uses 1.5 spaces per dwelling unit. For context, I did some reading recently that very urban areas where people are not often to have cars. They'll go as low as 0.75 spaces per dwelling unit. That would be way too low in this case, but it just gives some context to the context.
We do have a sliding scale for required parking in other parts of our zoning ordinance that, like for business parking, my recollection is the businesses, essentially the bigger it gets, the less number of parking places you need per square foot, right? Is that?
There's your scale.
I think
I mean, as long as, if there's an allowance for it in our ordinance, yeah. I mean, I'm just one vote on the board, so that's my position is if the ordinance requires 2 parking spaces, that's what we should recommend.
Take a vote, I mean, I'm good. I disagree.
I disagree.
But
I'd rather see more greenery than concrete. More trees.
I didn't say it had to be asphalt. I just said parking space. There's a difference.
Well, so now with the conditions that we have, does the board wish to revisit number 2 about whether it meets required specifications? I'm going to push you guys to consensus before we get out of here. I'm going to mediate this one out for you.
I was the only one that said it did, so.
I'm a no vote.
I'm just, on the house that's like 20 feet apart, when you put the berm there, or is the berm there on that one already? Will it still meet qualifications once we add? So it'll be right up and all close together? Is that part of the zone, or is that?
It's one of the
It's
conditions.
zoning, one of the, it'd be zoning compliant in any event.
But there'll be a burn put there.
There'll
Oh,
be a
there's gonna be
fence
a
and
burn
landscape.
put there, that'd be great. Yeah, awesome. And then the fence, and that would solve our problem.
Put the fence 15 feet.
Isn't that what we're saying?
Folks, let's keep it to the board here to
Oh, sorry.
deliberate.
I'm sorry. But isn't that what we're saying? The burn's gonna stay where it is?
The burn stays
The
where it
fence
stops.
comes from where the burn starts, and the fence starts, and they're gonna put a 15-foot.
Landscape buffer, no berm, just
Oh,
fence and then
landscape buffer.
plants, right, flat land.
Right.
That's what we're.
I don't know like that. I don't see where the trees gonna grow. It's gonna be green giants. Involved. What are we taking a vote on right now?
Yeah, I was going to say, we've agreed on conditions as far, I've got the 5 conditions listed here. I was asking, several of you expressed the idea that if there were conditions, then you would like to have that before you talked about, you'd like to revisit the issues of whether you felt like the non-compliant things have been solved. That's why I asked back, do you want to revisit that issue in number 2 about meeting the required conditions and specifications? And Mr. Milligan said parking is parking, and no. The other ones, I don't have Mr. Boyd said
It meets.
he would find it meets, so I'm trying to find out what the other,
For parking?
No, we're just talking overall.
talking about number 2.
Oh, as a whole? Yeah, with those conditions, man, fine.
Yes.
I'm fine.
Okay, so it's,
Did you get Mr. Williams?
Yep. With the conditions, the vote is 6-1 that it does meet, provided that the conditions are included. Is that correct?
Correct.
All right. Once you had not voted on We're number 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So, starting at number 5, is that right, Mr. Chair? We'll
Yes,
start.
number 5, before we stop. And I'll go ahead and read it again. It's the board's conclusion that the special use will or will not be injurious or harmful to the permitted uses and enjoyment of other properties in the vicinity of the subject property. And on that one, with the conditions that have been suggested, that I would say it will not.
I'll say the same thing.
It will not.
Will not.
Will not. Will not.
Hold up. All right, number
6, it's the board's conclusion that the establishment of a special use will or will not impede normal, orderly, or permitted development and improvement of properties in the vicinity of the subject property.
I say it will not.
will not impede.
I'll say it will not.
I agree with the conditions of the buffering and the lighting, the moving and the relocating of the items we discussed.
No.
I will not. So that's unanimous.
Unless of the conditions. We're up to number 7.
Okay, it's the board's conclusion that the exterior architectural appeal and functional plan of any proposed special use structure will or will not be significantly inconsistent with the exterior architectural appeal and functional plan of structures already constructed or being constructed in the vicinity of the subject property or the general character of the subject district.
A complicated way of asking whether you think this is generally in conformance with the surrounding area.
You haven't seen what
it look like.
What do it look like?
Yeah.
Nobody said what it looks like.
Do we have a rendering of any sort? We don't know how this works, so I don't know how you.
We need a side view.
It'll be great. I agree.
Yeah, I'm not sure if an architectural rendering was a requirement of our submittal. I guess staff can attest to that. I will say, these are 3-story luxury apartments, mixed materials, masonry, hardy. These are market rates, so when we finish it, I think at our waterside project, I think the 1 bedrooms will be $13.50 a month. So, but these are there are similar properties around town that you can see that we've built, and some that are currently under construction. If folks would like to. We haven't gotten that far. We're just talking about a site plan and the ability to use this. We don't have full architectural plans yet at this stage.
Notice the conditions, just ask if you think it'll be generally in conformance with it. It doesn't have to be right. I mean, maybe.
So I'll speak up here. I think it would be a good idea to make a condition that they supply a rendering and showing the materials to staff, that they will assure that it is conformance.
Color and materials.
Yeah. We're still approved as conditions.
Right. Or you want me to add that as a condition?
Yes.
Condition 6? Yes. All right. Supply of architectural rendering to staff?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
We're agreeing.
Okay. All right, so what's the board's pleasure on number 7?
Well,
Okay. It will not be significant.
Will not.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right,
So that
so
condition is.
all of you?
Yes.
Yes.
Now we're up to number 8.
The word, 2 words, drainage and parking, and, oh, I got to read it for the group, I'm sorry. It's the board's conclusion that that adequate utilities, access roads, drainage, parking, or necessary facilities have or have not been, or will not be provided.
Remember, you've already included as a condition that the drainage has to be in compliance.
And the parking.
And on the other part about the traffic, I don't know that there was any competent evidence the other way, so I think you're almost required to find it.
And access roads are just really two of them, I guess.
Yes. We're talking about parking spaces, and I guess, would you consider the trash compactor, the waste, being part of utilities?
Well, they stated, we've already made that condition.
Yeah, they were gonna move it.
They're gonna move
Relook.
it. Well, I guess we did talk about utilities in water and sewer connections, assuming
They've already.
they would have already got the yes. There's available water and sewer for this development. I would
Teach to coal plants.
Yeah,
Next door.
What's the board's pleasure on this?
Is some of this roadway on Will?
Will be
May I
provided.
ask? I'm sorry. I thought I had heard somebody made a comment about some of this roadway was on Leland's property. I don't know if this
No.
pertains to it, but I have to ask.
So,
No.
so a portion of the property that we own is in Leland's jurisdiction. That we would have to work through whatever approvals are necessary for that connection, I assume with Leland. But it's owned here, so it's not Leland's property, it's our property, but it is a strip of Leland's property between two Belville. Does that make sense?
It is perfectly permissible for you to find that it will be provided with the conditions that you want to support. Is that the board's?
Yes.
those conditions, yeah.
With those conditions, yes. It's,
And then finally,
Number 9, it is the board's conclusion that adequate measures have or have not been or will not be taken to provide ingress and egress designed to minimize traffic congestion on applicable private and public streets.
So is the access road, the dirt road right there by Cape Side? Pool road?
It's on proof.
I'm going to caution, we have to stick with the evidence that
Right.
we're taking tonight.
Yeah.
We did have a traffic engineer.
Right.
Based on the testimony of the traffic engineer,
it will be.
have and will have.
Have or will.
And they're
Yeah,
updating, updating that intersection.
I guess it's will, it's not good, but yeah.
Will.
Will be taken to provide egress and egress design to minimize traffic congestion on applicable private and public streets.
Will.
What's the board's?
Will.
And they have another land.
Is that right, Mr. Chair? All of you agree on that?
Everybody unanimous on that?
Yes.
Okay. And I think it's based on the testimony that was given.
Well, I have 6 conditions here. I just want to go over those real quick, make sure we got them. We've already voted on everything. The first one is the lighting issue. The second one is the relocation of the pickleball and dumpster. Third one is the buffering to include landscaping. The fourth one is to ensure or to require certification that the drainage is in compliance with all the state and local permitting requirements. Fifth one is bicycle parking, and sixth one is to supply an architectural rendering to staff. Is that
Excuse
right?
me, Norwood. I think you said the car parking. I just want to make sure that my notes are reflecting this right. So you were requiring more bicycle parking, and what did you decide on the car parking? That it was okay?
It was 6 to 1.
Okay.
6 to 1, we had 1 dissent
Okay,
on that.
I just wanted to make sure.
Parking's fine.
Okay.
I wanted to make sure it wasn't a condition, that's what I'm...
The board was in agreement that it meant it was adequate.
As an aside, you were cutting into my drinking time.
Actually,
Not to mention mine.
all right.
Have a nice day.
So based upon the following findings of facts and conclusion, it is the decision of the board that the application for the special use permit be granted or denied, subject to the following conditions that Mr. Blanchard just shared with the board.
Mr. Chairman,
Ms. Williams? go ahead.
I just want to make sure that I got your motion correctly, and that was, for your summary, that there would be a recommendation to the Board of Commissioners for
Right. Yeah,
approval
it's a recommendation.
with conditions.
Well, instead of using granted or denied, we will recommend the special use permit for approval to the Board of Commissioners with the conditions that Mr. Blanchard just.
Now, I'll go home tonight and write up your conditions, give them to you, so you got something better than mine.
So,
You go right along.
we don't have to vote because we've gone through each item.
If you just, the formality of you voting and doing that, yes, go ahead and do it.
Okay. So those are in favor of recommending the special use permit to the Board of Commissioners indicate by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. So this recommendation will be submitted to our Town Board of Commissioners for consideration at one of their upcoming meetings. So if you, as a member of the public, if you're so inclined, you can come back and address the issue with that one. And thank you for coming tonight and sharing your concerns. Is there any other business before the planning board tonight?
I make a motion, we adjourn.
All those in favor indicate by saying aye. Any opposed? Meeting is adjourned. Appreciate your time. Appreciate I think it's funny how you and I all rubbing into each other. Close to retirement. That's the this one's going to and I said, well, watch this. Your head was like Good luck. You know what the concerns are, so.
We know where you live. We have you down here. But if you look at one street, make sure you'll get another letter.